The discovery of Alpharius marked the end of an era that had defined much of the Great Crusade's early momentum. By the time the 20th Primarch was finally located, the Imperium had already expanded across thousands of worlds, and 18 of his gene brothers had long since taken their places at the head of their respective legions. The circumstances surrounding Alpharius's recovery stood in stark contrast to the well-documented reunions that had preceded him, shrouded in an opacity that would come to characterize everything associated with the Alpha Legion. Unlike the dramatic discoveries of Leman Russ on the ice world of Fenris or the gladiatorial spectacle that surrounded Angron's recovery from Nuceria, Alpharius's reunion with the Emperor occurred without fanfare or detailed imperial records. The official accounts, such as they existed, provided only the barest outline of events. The Primarch was found commanding what appeared to be a human fleet in the outer reaches of imperial space, already demonstrating the tactical acumen and strategic thinking that would define his approach to warfare. What made this discovery particularly unusual was not just the timing, but the apparent sophistication of the forces under Alpharius's command and his immediate understanding of imperial doctrine and objectives. The lack of comprehensive documentation regarding Alpharius's homeworld, his upbringing, or the specific circumstances of his discovery created an information void that stood in sharp contrast to the detailed histories maintained for his brothers. Where the archives contained extensive records of Guilliman's transformation of Crag or Dorn's fortress-building campaigns on Inwit, the files concerning Alpharius contained frustrating gaps and inconsistencies. Some sources suggested he had been raised on a world at the very edge of the galaxy, while others hinted at a more nomadic existence among various human populations. The truth remained elusive, buried beneath layers of classification and deliberate obfuscation that seemed to extend back to the very moment of his recovery. What distinguished Alpharius's integration into the imperial hierarchy was the unprecedented speed with which he assumed full command of the 20th Legion. The typical pattern established by previous Primarch discoveries involved a period of observation and gradual integration, during which the newly found Gene Father would study his legion's traditions, meet with key commanders, and slowly assume greater responsibility. Perdurabo had spent months analyzing the Iron Warrior's siege doctrines before implementing changes, while Corax had taken time to understand the Raven Guard's operational methods before reshaping them according to his vision. Alpharius bypassed this conventional approach entirely. Within what appeared to be mere weeks of his official recognition, he had assumed complete operational control of the Alpha Legion. The transition occurred with such smoothness that many observers suspected it had been orchestrated well in advance, though no evidence existed to support such speculation. The 20th Legion's existing command structure seemed to dissolve and reform around their Primarch, with an efficiency that suggested either exceptional organizational planning or a level of preparation that defied conventional explanation. The Alpha Legion itself underwent immediate and dramatic changes under Alpharius's leadership. The Legion had previously operated as a relatively conventional force, distinguished primarily by their expertise in reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Under their Primarch's guidance, they rapidly evolved into something far more complex and sophisticated. New operational doctrines emerged that emphasized deception, misdirection, and the cultivation of multiple contingency plans for every engagement. The Legion's structure became increasingly compartmentalized, with individual units operating according to protocols that often seemed contradictory or incomprehensible to outside observers. The Emperor's interactions with Alpharius followed patterns that differed significantly from his relationships with other Primarchs. Where the Master of Mankind had engaged in lengthy philosophical discussions with Magnus or provided detailed strategic guidance to Horus, his meetings with Alpharius were notably brief and private. These sessions occurred away from the usual ceremonial contexts that accompanied Primarch audiences, taking place in secured chambers aboard the Imperial flagship with no witnesses or official records. The content of these conversations remained unknown, though their frequency and duration suggested a level of communication that that went beyond routine briefings or strategic updates. The reaction of Alpharius's brother Primarchs to his sudden appearance ranged from cautious curiosity to outright suspicion. Dorn, whose methodical nature demanded clear lines of authority and transparent operational procedures, found the Alpha Legion's new doctrines deeply troubling. The Imperial Fist's Primarch had built his reputation on fortress warfare and defensive strategies that relied on predictable, well-established protocols. Alpharius's emphasis on deception and misdirection represented everything Dorn instinctively distrusted in military operations. Guilliman approached the situation with characteristic analytical precision, attempting to understand how the Alpha Legion's unconventional methods might fit within the broader framework of Imperial military doctrine. The Ultramarines Primarch had spent considerable effort codifying effective combat strategies and organizational structures, creating systematic approaches that could be replicated across different theaters of operation. Alpharius's methods seemed to deliberately reject such systematization, relying instead on adaptability and improvisation that defied easy categorization or replication. Horus, despite his role as War Master and his generally diplomatic approach to interlegion relations, harbored private reservations about the Alpha Legion's operational security. The Sons of Horus had developed extensive intelligence networks throughout the Crusade fleets, and the sudden appearance of a legion that specialized in information warfare represented a potential challenge to established intelligence hierarchies. The War Master's concerns were practical rather than personal, focused on maintaining the coordination and communication systems that kept the Great Crusade functioning across multiple sectors simultaneously. The timing of Alpharius's discovery created additional complications beyond simple skepticism from his brothers. By the latter stages of the Great Crusade, the Primarchs had established complex relationships and informal alliances that had developed over decades of joint operations. Perturabo and Dorn had engaged in their famous rivalry over siege warfare techniques, while Magnus and Mortarion had developed a philosophical antagonism regarding the use of psychic powers. These relationships had been forged through shared experiences, mutual respect earned through combat, and the gradual understanding that came from working together toward common objectives. Alpharius entered this established network as an outsider whose methods and motivations remained largely opaque to his brothers. His legion's rapid transformation and unconventional operational doctrines made it difficult for other Primarchs to predict how the Alpha Legion might perform in joint operations or respond to strategic directives. This uncertainty was compounded by Alpharius's personal demeanor, which combined apparent openness with an underlying sense that important information was being withheld or deliberately obscured. The Alpha Legion's recruitment and training procedures also underwent significant changes that attracted attention from other legions' command structures. Where most legions maintained relatively straightforward selection criteria and training regimens, the 20th Legion began implementing complex psychological evaluations and specialized instruction programs that seemed designed to produce warriors capable of operating independently across multiple operational parameters. These changes occurred rapidly enough to suggest they had been planned well in advance, though no documentation existed to explain how such planning could have taken place before Alpharius's official discovery. The broader implications of Alpharius's integration into the imperial hierarchy extended beyond simple military considerations. The Primarchs represented not just military commanders, but symbols of imperial unity and the Emperor's vision for humanity's future. Each discovery had been celebrated as a restoration of the Emperor's intended design, bringing the Imperium closer to its full potential. Alpharius's arrival, while completing the roster of recovered Primarchs, introduced elements of uncertainty that seemed to complicate rather than clarify the Imperial project's ultimate direction. The administrative complications surrounding the Alpha Legion's integration into Imperial command structures would prove to be merely the surface manifestation of a far more profound mystery that would not be fully understood until the final days of the Horus Heresy. The truth about Alpharius extended beyond unconventional operational doctrines or deliberate obfuscation of military records. What the Emperor and the broader imperial hierarchy had accepted as the recovery of the 20th Primarch was, in reality, something unprecedented in the annals of the Great Crusade, the discovery of two beings sharing a single identity, two souls bound by connections that transcended normal understanding of consciousness and individual existence. The revelation of Omegon's existence represented a fundamental challenge to established assumptions about the Primarch project itself. Where the other 18 recovered Gene Fathers had each represented singular entities with distinct personalities, capabilities, and developmental trajectories, the 20th Legion's leadership operated according to principles that defied conventional comprehension. Omegon had remained hidden not through elaborate deception or technological concealment, but through a form of psychic symbiosis that allowed both beings to function as aspects of a unified consciousness while maintaining separate physical forms. The nature of this connection extended far beyond simple telepathic communication or shared strategic thinking. Alpharius and Omegon demonstrated an ability to coordinate their actions across vast distances without apparent need for conventional communication methods. When one engaged in combat operations in a particular sector, the other could simultaneously direct completely different missions on the opposite side of the galaxy, yet both would demonstrate perfect awareness of the other's tactical situation and strategic objectives. This synchronization occurred with such precision that observers who encountered either Primarch often remained unaware they were dealing with one half of a dual entity. The physical manifestation of their shared existence proved equally remarkable. Both Alpharius and Omegon possessed identical genetic markers, biometric signatures, and even psychological profiles when subjected to standard Imperial evaluation procedures. The similarities extended beyond superficial characteristics to encompass fundamental aspects of their enhanced physiology. Medical examinations conducted by Imperial apothecaries revealed matching organ configurations, identical reaction times, and synchronized biological rhythms that suggested a level of coordination extending to the cellular level. The question of whether this unprecedented dual nature represented an intentional aspect of the Emperor's design or an unforeseen consequence of the Primarch creation process remained a subject of intense speculation among those few individuals who became aware of Omegon's existence. The master of mankind's own reactions to this revelation, when it eventually occurred, provided few definitive answers. His response suggested neither complete surprise nor confirmation of deliberate planning, maintaining the characteristic ambiguity that surrounded many aspects of the Primarch project's deeper mysteries. Some theoretical frameworks proposed that the Emperor had indeed intended to create a Primarch capable of existing in multiple forms simultaneously, recognizing the potential strategic advantages such an entity could provide in coordinating complex military operations across the expanding Imperium. This interpretation suggested that Alpharius and Omegon represented the successful implementation of advanced consciousness manipulation techniques that had been deemed too risky or complex to attempt with the other Primarchs. The 20th Legion's specialization in intelligence gathering and covert operations would have provided ideal testing conditions for such experimental approaches to enhanced human development. Alternative theories suggested that the dual nature of Alpharius and Omegon resulted from an unexpected interaction between the Primarch creation process and unknown variables present during their gestation or early development. The Chaos Power's intervention in scattering the Primarch pods across the galaxy had introduced numerous unpredictable elements into what had been intended as a controlled developmental process. The possibility existed that exposure to specific warp currents or dimensional anomalies during their transportation had caused a single Primarch consciousness to split into two interconnected but distinct entities. The implications of this dual existence extended directly into the Alpha Legion's command structure and operational methodology. The famous phenomenon of Alpha Legion Astartes declaring, "I am Alpharius," took on new significance when viewed through the lens of their Primarch's shared identity. What had initially appeared to be a simple security measure designed to confuse enemies and protect the Legion's leadership revealed itself as something far more complex, a reflection of the fundamental nature of identity within the 20th Legion's organizational philosophy. The Alpha Legion's recruitment and indoctrination processes had been specifically designed to blur individual identity in favor of collective purpose. New initiates underwent psychological conditioning that emphasized adaptability and the ability to assume multiple roles as operational requirements demanded. This training produced Astartes who could convincingly portray different ranks, specializations, and even personalities when circumstances required such deception. The I am Alpharius phenomenon represented the ultimate expression of this philosophy, creating a legion where any member could theoretically serve as a proxy for their Primarch's authority. The practical implementation of this identity fluidity created unprecedented challenges for Imperial intelligence services and enemy forces attempting to understand Alpha Legion operations. Traditional approaches to military intelligence relied heavily on identifying key leadership figures, understanding command hierarchies, and predicting strategic decisions based on known personality traits and tactical preferences. The Alpha Legion structure rendered these approaches largely ineffective, as the apparent death or capture of important commanders often had no discernible impact on ongoing operations. The genetic enhancement procedures that created Alpha Legion Astartes incorporated subtle modifications that enhanced their natural ability to mimic speech patterns, mannerisms, and behavioral characteristics. These changes went beyond the standard implantation processes used by other legions, involving additional psycho-conditioning that allowed individual warriors to rapidly adopt new personas as operational requirements demanded. The result was a force of Astartes who could seamlessly integrate into various social and military contexts while maintaining their core loyalty to Legion objectives. The command structure that emerged from this philosophical approach defied conventional military organization principles. Rather than operating through traditional hierarchical chains of authority, the Alpha Legion functioned as an interconnected network where information and directives could flow through multiple pathways simultaneously. Individual commanders possessed broad discretionary authority to interpret orders according to local conditions, while maintaining awareness of broader strategic objectives through methods that remained opaque to outside observers. The synchronization between Alpharius and Omegon enabled this decentralized command structure to function with remarkable efficiency. Both Primarchs could simultaneously oversee different aspects of complex operations, while ensuring perfect coordination between seemingly independent units. This capability allowed the Alpha Legion to conduct multiple concurrent missions that appeared unrelated to enemy intelligence services, but actually formed components of larger strategic plans that could span years or even decades in their execution. The psychological impact of the dual Primarch phenomenon on Alpha Legion morale and unit cohesion proved consistently positive throughout their operational history. Rather than creating confusion or uncertainty about leadership authority, the knowledge that their gene fathers existed as complementary aspects of a unified consciousness reinforced the Legion's emphasis on collective identity and shared purpose. Individual Astartes understood that their personal contributions formed part of a larger pattern that extended beyond their immediate awareness or comprehension. The training regimens implemented throughout the Alpha Legion reflected this philosophical framework through exercises that emphasized collective problem-solving and distributed decision-making. Rather than focusing solely on individual combat prowess or specialized technical skills, Alpha Legion instruction programs developed each Astartes' ability to function effectively within complex organizational structures, where traditional command relationships might be deliberately obscured or temporarily suspended. The intelligence-gathering capabilities that distinguished the Alpha Legion from other Imperial forces benefited enormously from their Primarch's unique nature. Alpharius and Omegon could simultaneously cultivate different intelligence networks, pursue contradictory cover identities, and maintain separate sets of contacts without creating operational conflicts or security vulnerabilities. This approach enabled the Legion to develop unprecedented insight into enemy capabilities, political situations, and strategic intentions across multiple theaters of operation. The compartmentalization that characterized Alpha Legion operations extended to their relationships with other Imperial forces and institutions. Different units within the Legion maintained distinct operational profiles that could appear to support conflicting objectives or strategic approaches. This apparent inconsistency served multiple purposes. It confused potential enemies, provided operational flexibility, and created redundant capabilities that ensured mission success even when individual components were compromised or destroyed. The technological resources available to the Alpha Legion reflected their specialized requirements and operational methods. Their equipment inventories included advanced communication systems capable of maintaining secure connections across vast distances, sophisticated disguise and identity alteration devices, and specialized weapons designed for covert operations rather than conventional battlefield engagements. These resources were distributed throughout the Legion according to principles that prioritized operational security over administrative efficiency. The recruitment territories that supplied new initiates to the Alpha Legion were carefully selected to provide candidates with appropriate psychological and cultural backgrounds for the Legion's specialized requirements. These worlds typically featured complex political situations, diverse cultural traditions, and populations accustomed to operating within ambiguous authority structures. The resulting recruits possessed natural advantages in adapting to the Alpha Legion's unconventional organizational methods and operational approaches. The transformation of the 20th Legion from their pre-Primarch identity into the Alpha Legion represented one of the most dramatic organizational metamorphoses witnessed during the Great Crusade. Prior to Alpharius's arrival, the Legion had operated as the Ghost Legion, a designation that reflected both their relatively small size and their specialization in reconnaissance operations that kept them at the periphery of major campaigns. These Astartes had earned recognition for their proficiency in intelligence gathering and their ability to operate independently in hostile territory, but they lacked the distinctive character and tactical doctrine that defined their brother legions. The Ghost Legion's operational history before reunification with their Primarch consisted primarily of scouting missions, preliminary reconnaissance of target worlds, and support operations for larger Imperial forces. Their gene seed had proven stable and reliable, producing Astartes with enhanced sensory capabilities and improved cognitive processing speeds that made them natural candidates for intelligence work. However, the Legion's small numbers and limited resources had prevented them from developing the specialized equipment and advanced training protocols that would later distinguish the Alpha Legion. The arrival of Alpharius and the subsequent revelation of Omegon's existence initiated a complete restructuring of Legion doctrine, organization, and identity. The transformation began with the implementation of what would become known as the Hydra Cell structure, a revolutionary approach to military organization that departed radically from the hierarchical command systems employed by other Space Marine legions. This new structure divided the Legion into interconnected cells of varying sizes, each capable of independent operation while maintaining communication and coordination with the broader Legion network. The Hydra Cell system drew its inspiration from the mythological creature that would become the Legion's primary symbol. Each cell functioned as both an independent operational unit and a component of larger organizational structures, creating redundancy and resilience that ensured the Legion's continued effectiveness even when individual cells were compromised or destroyed. The system's name reflected its core principle. The destruction of one cell would not significantly impact the others, and new cells could rapidly form to replace those that were lost. Implementation of this structure required extensive reorganization of existing Legion assets and personnel. Veterans who had served with the Ghost Legion found themselves reassigned to new units with unfamiliar command relationships and operational procedures. The process involved careful evaluation of each Astartes' capabilities, psychological profile, and potential for adaptation to the Legion's new methods. Those who demonstrated particular aptitude for deception, infiltration, or information warfare received specialized training and enhanced responsibilities within the emerging Hydra cell network. The compartmentalized command hierarchy that emerged from this reorganization represented a fundamental departure from traditional Space Marine Legion structures. Rather than maintaining clear chains of command that could be easily understood and replicated, the Alpha Legion developed a system where authority and responsibility flowed through multiple pathways simultaneously. Individual commanders might receive orders from several different sources, each providing partial information about broader operational objectives while maintaining security through deliberate fragmentation of intelligence. This compartmentalization served multiple strategic purposes beyond simple operational security. It prevented enemy intelligence services from gaining comprehensive understanding of Alpha Legion capabilities or intentions through the capture or interrogation of individual personnel. More importantly, it enabled the Legion to pursue multiple concurrent strategies that might appear contradictory to outside observers, but actually formed components of larger plans that could span years in their execution. The training protocols developed to support this new organizational structure emphasized adaptability and psychological flexibility above traditional martial prowess. While Alpha Legion Astartes maintained the enhanced combat capabilities common to all Space Marines, their instruction focused heavily on developing skills in deception, infiltration, and information warfare. New recruits underwent extensive psychological conditioning designed to enhance their ability to assume false identities, maintain operational security under interrogation, and function effectively within ambiguous command structures. The development of the Legion's signature tactical doctrines proceeded in parallel with organizational restructuring. Infiltration became the primary method for gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions, but Alpha Legion infiltration techniques went far beyond simple reconnaissance or sabotage operations. Legion operatives learned to integrate themselves into enemy command structures, political organizations, and civilian populations for extended periods, sometimes maintaining their cover identities for years while slowly gathering information and establishing networks of contacts and resources. Misdirection evolved from a supporting tactical element into a core component of Alpha Legion strategy. Rather than simply concealing their true intentions, Legion commanders learned to actively manipulate enemy perceptions and decision-making processes. This involved creating false intelligence, establishing fake operational patterns, and conducting deliberate deception operations designed to lead enemies toward predetermined conclusions that would ultimately serve Alpha Legion objectives. Information warfare became perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Alpha Legion tactical doctrine. The Legion developed comprehensive capabilities for intercepting, analyzing, and manipulating enemy communications. Their technical specialists created advanced equipment for electronic surveillance and signal intelligence gathering, while their psychological warfare experts designed propaganda and disinformation campaigns capable of undermining enemy morale and unit cohesion. The integration of these tactical elements required extensive coordination between different Legion specializations and organizational levels. Intelligence gathered through infiltration operations informed misdirection campaigns, while information warfare capabilities supported both infiltration and misdirection efforts. The Hydra cell structure enabled this coordination to occur without creating vulnerable centralized command nodes that could be targeted by enemy forces. The adoption of the Hydra symbol as the Legion's primary identifier reflected both their organizational structure and their tactical philosophy. The creature's multiple heads represented the distributed nature of Legion command and the redundancy built into their operational systems. The symbol's mythological associations with regeneration and resilience emphasized the Legion's ability to recover from losses and adapt to changing circumstances. The visual design incorporated subtle variations that allowed different cells and units to maintain distinct identities while remaining recognizably part of the larger legion. The motto Hydra Dominatus emerged during this period as both a battle cry and a philosophical statement about the legion's approach to warfare and their role within the broader imperial hierarchy. The phrase combined references to their symbolic creature with assertions of dominance and control that reflected their confidence in their methods and capabilities. Legion members used the motto as a recognition phrase during covert operations and as a rallying cry during conventional engagements. The practical implementation of these new doctrines required significant investment in specialized equipment and training facilities. The Legion established covert training centers on various worlds throughout Imperial space, each focusing on different aspects of their operational requirements. Some facilities specialized in infiltration techniques and identity assumption, while others concentrated on advanced communications technology or psychological warfare methods. The recruitment territories selected to supply new initiates to the transformed Legion reflected their specialized requirements. Worlds with complex political situations, diverse cultural traditions, and populations experienced in operating within ambiguous authority structures provided ideal candidates for Alpha Legion service. These recruits possessed natural advantages in adapting to the Legion's unconventional methods and demonstrated psychological resilience necessary for extended covert operations. The Legion's relationship with imperial institutions and other military forces became increasingly complex as their new identity solidified. Their methods often conflicted with established imperial military doctrine, creating friction with conventional forces that expected clear command relationships and predictable operational procedures. However, their effectiveness in achieving strategic objectives gradually earned them recognition and grudging acceptance from imperial commanders who might disapprove of their methods, but could not argue with their results. The technological resources developed to support Alpha Legion operations reflected their unique requirements and operational methods. Advanced communication systems maintained secure connections across vast distances while remaining undetectable to enemy surveillance efforts. Sophisticated disguise equipment enabled operatives to alter their physical appearance and assume convincing false identities. Specialized weapons designed for covert operations prioritized concealment and versatility over raw destructive power. The genetic modifications incorporated into Alpha Legion gene seed during this transformation period enhanced their natural capabilities for deception and infiltration. These changes went beyond standard Astartes implantation procedures, involving subtle alterations to neurological structures that improved memory retention, pattern recognition, and behavioral mimicry. The modifications enabled Legion members to rapidly learn new languages, cultural practices, and social behaviors necessary for successful infiltration operations. The command protocols that governed Alpha Legion operations during this period established precedents that would define their methods throughout the remainder of the Great Crusade. Orders typically provided broad strategic objectives while leaving tactical implementation to local commanders who possessed better understanding of immediate circumstances. This approach required exceptional initiative and judgment from individual officers, but enabled rapid adaptation to changing situations without waiting for detailed instructions from higher authority. The intelligence networks established during the Legion's transformation created unprecedented capabilities for gathering and analyzing information about enemy activities throughout Imperial space. These networks operated independently of conventional Imperial intelligence services, maintaining their own communication systems, analytical capabilities, and operational security procedures. The information gathered through these networks often provided strategic advantages that proved decisive in subsequent military operations. The Alpha Legion's operational methodology reached its full maturation during the latter phases of the Great Crusade, when their transformed doctrine and organizational structure were put to the test across multiple theaters of war. The campaigns that followed their reunification with Alpharius demonstrated capabilities that consistently confounded both allies and enemies, establishing patterns of warfare that would define the Legion's approach throughout their existence. These operations revealed the true scope of their strategic thinking and the sophisticated nature of their intelligence apparatus, while simultaneously highlighting the fundamental differences between their methods and those employed by their brother legions. The Testra Prime compliance operation exemplified the Alpha Legion's preference for achieving victory through comprehensive preparation and psychological manipulation rather than direct military confrontation. The world itself presented a complex strategic challenge that had frustrated previous Imperial compliance efforts. Testra Prime's inhabitants had developed an advanced technological civilization built around sophisticated orbital defense platforms and a decentralized command structure that made conventional siege warfare impractical. The planet's three major continents were governed by competing political factions that maintained an uneasy balance of power through mutual deterrence and carefully negotiated resource-sharing agreements. Previous attempts at compliance had followed standard Imperial doctrine, beginning with diplomatic overtures backed by displays of military force. When negotiations failed, conventional assault forces had attempted to establish beachheads on the planet's surface, only to encounter coordinated resistance from all three factions despite their mutual antagonisms. The orbital defense grid proved capable of inflicting severe casualties on Imperial vessels, while the planet's defenders demonstrated tactical coordination that suggested extensive intelligence sharing between otherwise hostile political entities. The Alpha Legion's approach to Testra Prime began months before their forces entered the system. Infiltration teams had been inserted into the planet's population through carefully orchestrated merchant exchanges, refugee movements, and technical assistance programs that appeared to originate from neutral trading partners rather than Imperial sources. These operatives spent extensive periods establishing credible identities within each of the three major factions, gradually working their way into positions of influence within military commands, industrial organizations, and intelligence services. The intelligence gathered through these infiltration efforts revealed the true nature of Testra Prime's defensive coordination. The three factions maintained their public antagonisms while secretly sharing military intelligence and coordinating defensive strategies through a complex network of unofficial channels. This arrangement allowed each faction to maintain face with their respective populations while presenting a united front against external threats. The system had evolved over generations of conflict and represented a sophisticated approach to collective defense that had never been formally acknowledged or documented. Rather than attempting to break this coordination through conventional military pressure, the Alpha Legion chose to exploit the inherent tensions within the system. Carefully crafted disinformation campaigns began appearing within each faction's intelligence networks, suggesting that their partners were secretly negotiating separate agreements with Imperial forces. Forged documents appeared to show detailed plans for betrayal, while intercepted communications contained discussions of territorial concessions that would disadvantage specific factions in any post-compliance political arrangement. The psychological warfare campaign that accompanied these disinformation efforts targeted the fundamental assumptions that held the defensive alliance together. Alpha Legion operatives began spreading rumors about resource hoarding, military preparations that could be used for inter-factional conflict, and secret negotiations with off-world trading partners that violated existing agreements. Each piece of false intelligence was carefully calibrated to exploit known personality conflicts between specific leaders and historical grievances that had been temporarily set aside in the face of Imperial pressure. The effectiveness of these operations became apparent when the three factions began withdrawing military assets from shared defensive positions to protect against potential betrayal by their allies. Orbital defense platforms that had previously been jointly operated suddenly found themselves with reduced crew complements as each faction recalled personnel to positions under their direct control. Communication protocols that had enabled rapid coordination of defensive responses were modified to prevent potential intelligence leaks, inadvertently creating delays and coordination failures that degraded overall defensive effectiveness. The Alpha Legion's final assault on Testra Prime occurred when the planet's defenses had been sufficiently weakened by internal suspicion and coordination failures. However, even this phase of the operation demonstrated their preference for indirect methods over conventional warfare. Rather than launching a massive orbital bombardment or deploying overwhelming ground forces, the Legion conducted simultaneous strikes against carefully selected targets that had been identified through their extensive intelligence gathering efforts. Key communication nodes were destroyed by sabotage teams that had been positioned months in advance, while cyber warfare specialists launched coordinated attacks against the orbital defense grid's control systems. The strikes occurred with such precision and timing that each faction initially assumed they were under attack by one of their planetary rivals rather than external Imperial forces. This confusion delayed effective defensive responses and prevented the coordination that might have enabled successful resistance against the Alpha Legion assault. The ground campaign that followed demonstrated the Legion's ability to exploit the intelligence advantages they had developed through their infiltration operations. Alpha Legion forces moved through the planet's urban areas with detailed knowledge of defensive positions, supply routes, and communication systems. Their advance was supported by local assets who had been cultivated during the infiltration phase and who now provided real-time intelligence about defensive movements and strategic planning. The speed with which Testra Prime's resistance collapsed surprised Imperial observers who had expected a prolonged siege campaign. The planet's surrender came not through military defeat in conventional terms, but through the systematic erosion of the defenders' ability to coordinate effective resistance. Each faction found itself fighting isolated battles against an enemy that seemed to possess perfect intelligence about their capabilities and intentions, while simultaneously dealing with the breakdown of alliance relationships that had previously provided their primary strategic advantage. The compliance of Testra Prime established patterns that would characterize Alpha Legion operations throughout the Great Crusade. Their preference for extensive preparation phases allowed them to gather comprehensive intelligence about target worlds and develop detailed understanding of political, military, and social structures. This intelligence was then used to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited through psychological warfare, disinformation campaigns, and targeted sabotage operations that avoided the need for costly direct military confrontations. The Legion's operations in the Galactic Fringe demonstrated their ability to adapt these methods to very different strategic environments. The Outer Rim territories presented challenges that differed significantly from the established civilizations found in more densely populated regions of the galaxy. Many of these worlds had been isolated for centuries or millennia, developing unique cultural and technological characteristics that made standard compliance approaches ineffective. The sparse population densities and vast distances between inhabited systems created logistical challenges that strained conventional Imperial military resources. Alpha Legion commanders approached these challenges by developing extensive networks of human auxiliaries drawn from local populations. Rather than relying primarily on Astartes forces supported by Imperial army units, they cultivated relationships with indigenous military organizations, merchant groups, and political factions that could provide both intelligence and operational support. These auxiliary forces often possessed detailed knowledge of local conditions, established supply networks, and cultural insights that proved invaluable for successful operations in unfamiliar environments. The recruitment and training of these auxiliary forces reflected the Alpha Legion's sophisticated understanding of human psychology and organizational behavior. Rather than simply offering material incentives or threatening military action, Legion recruiters identified individuals and groups whose existing motivations could be aligned with Imperial objectives. Merchants who sought expanded trading opportunities could be convinced to support Imperial expansion that would open new markets. Military leaders facing threats from rival factions could be offered imperial support in exchange for cooperation with compliance operations. The training provided to these auxiliaries went far beyond basic military instruction. Alpha Legion specialists taught advanced intelligence gathering techniques, communication protocols that enabled coordination with Legion forces, and psychological warfare methods that could be used against hostile populations. This training created networks of capable operatives who could function independently when direct Legion support was unavailable, while maintaining loyalty and effectiveness that rivaled conventional Imperial military units. The effectiveness of these auxiliary networks became apparent during complex operations that required simultaneous coordination across multiple star systems. Alpha Legion forces could initiate operations on one world, while their auxiliaries conducted supporting missions on nearby systems, creating strategic effects that appeared to result from much larger military forces than were actually involved. This approach enabled the Legion to maintain operational tempo across vast distances while conserving their limited Astartes resources for missions that specifically required their enhanced capabilities. The intelligence gathering capabilities that distinguished the Alpha Legion from other Imperial forces reached unprecedented levels of sophistication during their galactic fringe operations. The vast distances and sparse Imperial presence in these regions created opportunities for developing intelligence networks that operated with minimal oversight or interference from other Imperial institutions. Legion operatives could establish long-term cover identities and cultivate relationships with local populations without concern about conflicting with other Imperial intelligence efforts. These networks provided strategic intelligence that extended far beyond immediate operational requirements. Alpha Legion analysts developed comprehensive understanding of trade routes, resource distributions, political relationships, and cultural patterns across entire sectors. This information enabled them to predict political developments, identify emerging threats, and recognize opportunities for Imperial expansion that might not be apparent to conventional military planners operating with more limited intelligence resources. The technological capabilities that supported these intelligence operations reflected the Legion's emphasis on adaptability and operational flexibility. Their equipment inventories included advanced communication systems capable of maintaining contact across interstellar distances, sophisticated analytical tools for processing large volumes of intelligence data, and specialized devices for intercepting and decoding enemy communications. Much of this technology had been adapted or developed specifically for Alpha Legion requirements, incorporating innovations that were not available to other Imperial forces. The comparison between Alpha Legion tactical methods and those employed by other legions highlighted fundamental philosophical differences about the nature of warfare and the most effective approaches to achieving strategic objectives. The Imperial fists under Dorn had developed siege warfare techniques that emphasized methodical preparation, overwhelming firepower, and systematic reduction of enemy defensive positions. Their approach relied on superior logistics, advanced engineering capabilities, and the disciplined execution of well-established tactical doctrines that had proven effective across multiple theaters of operation. The Alpha Legion's methods represented almost the complete opposite of this approach. Rather than seeking decisive battles where superior Imperial military capabilities could be brought to bear, they preferred to avoid conventional engagements entirely. Their victories came through the systematic erosion of enemy capabilities, the exploitation of political and social vulnerabilities, and the creation of conditions where resistance became impossible rather than simply militarily disadvantageous. The Iron Warriors' approach to siege warfare shared some similarities with Alpha Legion methods, particularly in their emphasis on comprehensive preparation and the systematic identification of enemy weaknesses. However, Perdurabo's Legion focused these capabilities on conventional military targets, seeking to identify the most efficient methods for breaching fortifications and destroying defensive positions. The Alpha Legion applied similar analytical rigor to political, social, and and psychological targets that could be exploited without direct military confrontation. The effectiveness of Alpha Legion tactics in different theaters of war varied significantly based on the specific characteristics of their operational environments. In regions with complex political situations and sophisticated enemy intelligence capabilities, their methods often proved decisively effective. The time and resources invested in developing comprehensive intelligence networks and cultivating local assets typically produced strategic advantages that more than compensated for the extended preparation periods required. However, in theaters where rapid military action was required, or where enemies possessed limited political or social vulnerabilities, Alpha Legion methods sometimes proved less effective than conventional approaches. Their emphasis on preparation and intelligence gathering could create delays that allowed enemies to strengthen their positions or call for reinforcements. In some cases, the complexity of their operational plans created opportunities for failure that simpler, more direct approaches might have avoided. The development of the Legion's spy networks during this period established capabilities that would prove crucial during the later stages of the Great Crusade and the opening phases of the Horus Heresy. These networks operated independently of conventional Imperial intelligence services, maintaining their own recruitment procedures, training protocols, and operational security measures. The information gathered through these networks often provided strategic insights that were unavailable through other sources, giving the Alpha Legion advantages in planning and executing complex operations. The intelligence networks that had proven so effective in conventional compliance operations would soon face their greatest test when the Alpha Legion encountered forces that operated beyond the normal parameters of Imperial warfare. The first contact with the Cabal occurred during what appeared to be a routine reconnaissance mission in the outer reaches of the Galactic Fringe, where Alpha Legion operatives had been investigating reports of unusual Xenos activity that defied standard classification protocols. The initial encounter seemed unremarkable by the Legion's standards, another alien civilization that would require assessment and potential elimination according to Imperial doctrine. The beings that made contact with the Alpha Legion delegation possessed capabilities that immediately distinguished them from the typical Xeno species encountered during the Great Crusade. Their technology demonstrated mastery over temporal and dimensional manipulation that exceeded even the most advanced human achievements, while their knowledge of galactic history and political developments suggested intelligence networks that rivaled or surpassed Imperial capabilities. Most significantly, they demonstrated detailed understanding of the Primarch project, the nature of chaos, and strategic developments within the Imperium that should have been impossible for external observers to obtain. The Cabal's representatives included members of several alien species, each contributing specialized knowledge and capabilities to their collective mission. The Eldar among them possessed the psychic abilities necessary to perceive potential futures and temporal probability streams, while other species provided technological resources and analytical capabilities that enabled comprehensive modeling of galactic-scale political and military developments. Their organization had existed for millennia, operating in the shadows of galactic civilization while monitoring the rise and fall of various species and empires. The information presented during these initial meetings challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of the Great Crusade and humanity's role in galactic affairs. The Cabal's representatives revealed detailed knowledge of the Chaos powers and their influence over galactic events, describing a cosmic struggle that extended far beyond the territorial expansion and political unification that defined Imperial objectives. They presented evidence of Chaos corruption within the Imperium itself, identifying specific individuals and organizations that had been compromised by demonic influence or manipulation. The prophecy that formed the core of the Cabal's message to the Alpha Legion described two potential futures for humanity and the galaxy as a whole. Their seers had identified a critical decision point approaching in the near future that would determine the ultimate outcome of the struggle between order and chaos. The choice would be made not by the Emperor or the established Imperial hierarchy, but by individual actors whose decisions would cascade through galactic events in ways that would prove decisive for the fate of all sentient species. The first future scenario, presented by the Cabal, depicted humanity's rapid expansion throughout the galaxy under the Emperor's guidance, achieving the unification and technological advancement that represented the stated goals of the Great Crusade. In this timeline, humanity would successfully eliminate or subjugate all rival species, establishing a galactic empire that would endure for tens of thousands of years. The human population would grow to encompass trillions of individuals spread across millions of worlds, creating a civilization of unprecedented scale and capability. However, the Cabal's analysis revealed that this apparent success would ultimately serve chaos rather than order. The vast human population would provide an enormous reservoir of psychic energy and emotional resonance that the Chaos powers could exploit to strengthen their influence over the material universe. The imperial bureaucracy and military structure would gradually become corrupted from within as individuals in positions of authority succumbed to the subtle influences of demonic manipulation. The Emperor's psychic beacon would eventually be overwhelmed by the collective psychic emanations of humanity's expanded population, creating conditions that would enable chaos to achieve permanent dominance over the galaxy. The timeline for this corruption extended across millennia, with the process occurring gradually enough that individual generations would not recognize the systematic degradation of imperial institutions and values. Each compromise with chaos influence would seem reasonable given immediate circumstances, while the cumulative effect would be the transformation of the Imperium into a vehicle for chaos expansion rather than human advancement. The final result would be a galaxy where chaos achieved absolute dominance, with humanity serving as willing or unwilling agents of demonic powers that would then expand their influence to other dimensions and universes. The alternative future described by the Cabal required humanity's expansion to be halted or reversed before reaching the critical threshold that would enable chaos dominance. This scenario involved the systematic destruction of human civilization through internal conflict, alien intervention, or natural catastrophes that would reduce the human population to levels that could not sustain large-scale chaos influence. The immediate consequences would be devastating for humanity, involving the deaths of billions of individuals and the collapse of technological and cultural achievements that had required millennia to develop. The Cabal's analysis suggested that this catastrophic reduction in human population and influence would ultimately serve the cause of galactic order. Without the vast reservoir of human psychic energy to draw upon, the Chaos powers would find their influence over the material universe significantly diminished. Other species that had been suppressed or eliminated by imperial expansion would have opportunities to develop their own civilizations and contribute to galactic stability through diversity rather than human hegemony. The long-term result would be a galaxy where multiple species maintained balance through mutual cooperation rather than domination by any single faction. The presentation of these alternatives created profound psychological and philosophical challenges for the Alpha Legion leadership who received this information. Alpharius and Omegon found themselves confronted with a choice that transcended normal military or political considerations, requiring decisions about the fundamental value of human life and civilization against abstract concepts of cosmic balance and galactic stability. The weight of potentially condemning their own species to extinction in service of broader galactic interests created internal conflicts that would influence their subsequent actions throughout the Horus Heresy. The verification of the Cabal's claims required extensive investigation using the Alpha Legion's sophisticated intelligence networks and analytical capabilities. Legion operatives began conducting discrete inquiries into the evidence presented regarding chaos corruption within Imperial institutions, while their technical specialists attempted to validate the technological demonstrations that had accompanied the initial presentations. The process of verification revealed disturbing confirmation of many Cabal claims, particularly regarding the presence of chaos influence within various imperial organizations and the susceptibility of human populations to demonic manipulation. The psychological impact of this knowledge on individual Alpha Legion members varied significantly based on their personal backgrounds and philosophical orientations. Veterans who had witnessed the benefits of imperial expansion and the genuine improvements in human living conditions achieved through compliance operations found it difficult to accept that these achievements might ultimately serve malevolent purposes. Younger legionnaires who had been recruited after the Legion's transformation often demonstrated greater flexibility in adapting to the complex moral calculations that the Cabal's prophecy demanded. The compartmentalized nature of Alpha Legion operations enabled their leadership to limit knowledge of the Cabal's prophecy to specific individuals who possessed the psychological resilience and strategic understanding necessary to process this information effectively. The broader Legion membership continued operating according to established protocols and objectives, while key commanders grappled with the implications of potentially redirecting their efforts toward objectives that conflicted with official imperial doctrine and their oaths of loyalty to the Emperor. The decision-making process that followed these revelations involved extensive analysis of potential courses of action and their likely consequences. Alpharius and Omegon utilized their unique cognitive abilities to model various scenarios and evaluate the strategic implications of different approaches to the choice presented by the Cabal. Their analysis considered not only the immediate military and political consequences of various actions, but also the long-term effects on human civilization and galactic stability that would result from different decisions. The complexity of this decision was compounded by the limited time available for deliberation and the need to maintain operational security while conducting the analysis. The Cabal had indicated that the critical decision point was approaching rapidly, coinciding with political developments within the Imperium that would soon create opportunities for decisive action. The Alpha Legion's leadership recognized that delay or indecision would effectively constitute a choice to accept the first future scenario, as continued Imperial expansion would proceed according to existing momentum and established policies. The evaluation of potential allies and enemies in either scenario revealed additional complications that influenced the decision-making process. Supporting the Cabal's preferred outcome would require cooperation with Xeno species that had traditionally been considered enemies of humanity, while potentially opposing other Space Marine legions and Imperial institutions that represented the Alpha Legion's closest allies and brother organizations. The personal relationships and loyalties that had been forged during decades of joint operations created emotional and practical obstacles to actions that would effectively constitute betrayal of established alliances. The strategic analysis conducted during this period also considered the possibility that the Cabal's prophecy might be inaccurate or deliberately misleading. The Alpha Legion's intelligence specialists evaluated the motivations and capabilities of the various alien species involved in the Cabal, seeking to identify potential deceptions or hidden agendas that might compromise the validity of their predictions. This analysis revealed that while the Cabal's members possessed genuine prophetic abilities and sophisticated analytical capabilities, their interpretation of future events necessarily involved subjective judgments about values and priorities that might not align with human interests. The technological and psychic capabilities demonstrated by the Cabal provided additional evidence supporting their claims about the nature of chaos and its influence over galactic events. Alpha Legion specialists who observed these demonstrations confirmed that the aliens possessed abilities that exceeded known human achievements in several critical areas, particularly regarding temporal perception and dimensional manipulation. The consistency between their technological capabilities and their claims about cosmic forces suggested that their warnings about chaos influence deserved serious consideration, regardless of disagreements about appropriate responses. The gradual acceptance of the Cabal's prophecy as fundamentally accurate despite reservations about their proposed solutions, marked a turning point in Alpha Legion's strategic planning that would influence their actions throughout the remainder of the Great Crusade and the subsequent Horus Heresy. The knowledge that Imperial expansion might ultimately serve Chaos interests created a framework for evaluating subsequent events and opportunities that differed significantly from the assumptions that guided other Imperial forces. This perspective would prove decisive in shaping the Legion's response to Horus's rebellion and their complex relationship with both loyalist and traitor factions during the civil war that followed. The knowledge gained from the Cabal created an unprecedented crisis of loyalty within the Alpha Legion's command structure, as the implications of their prophecy directly contradicted the fundamental assumptions underlying the Great Crusade. The revelation that Imperial expansion might ultimately serve Chaos interests forced Alpharius and Omegon to confront the possibility that their oaths of loyalty to the Emperor and their dedication to human advancement could be fundamentally misguided. This realization occurred at a time when political tensions within the Imperium were already creating fractures that would soon erupt into open civil war, presenting the Alpha Legion with opportunities to influence events on a scale that matched the cosmic significance of the choice they faced. The emergence of Horus as a focal point for dissent within the Primarch Brotherhood provided the Alpha Legion with a potential vehicle for implementing the Cabal's preferred solution to the galactic crisis. The War Master's growing opposition to Imperial policies and his increasing willingness to challenge the Emperor's authority-created conditions that could potentially lead to the internal conflict necessary to halt humanity's expansion before reaching the critical threshold identified in the prophecy. However, the Alpha Legion's analysis of Horus's motivations and capabilities revealed significant concerns about his suitability as an instrument for achieving the Cabal's objectives. Horus's corruption by Chaos influences presented a fundamental contradiction to the Cabal's strategy for preventing Chaos dominance over the galaxy. The War Master's transformation during his recovery on Davin had introduced exactly the kind of demonic manipulation that the prophecy warned would ultimately consume human civilization. The Alpha Legion's intelligence networks confirmed that Horus was receiving guidance and support from entities that served the very powers the Cabal sought to weaken through humanity's destruction. This created a paradoxical situation where supporting Horus's rebellion might advance Chaos interests rather than preventing them. The strategic calculations required to navigate this contradiction involved complex assessments of probability and timing that pushed the Alpha Legion's analytical capabilities to their limits. Alpharius and Omegon recognized that Horus's rebellion could serve their purposes if it could be controlled and directed towards specific objectives that aligned with the Cabal's prophecy, while avoiding the complete Chaos domination that would result from unrestricted War Master victory. This required the Legion to pursue a strategy of limited support that would enable Horus to inflict sufficient damage on Imperial expansion capabilities without allowing him to achieve total victory. The decision to openly declare for Horus, while secretly maintaining alternative objectives, represented perhaps the most complex deception operation ever attempted by the Alpha Legion. The public declaration required convincing demonstrations of loyalty to the War Master's cause that would satisfy his supporters and intelligence services, while simultaneously implementing covert operations designed to limit the rebellion's effectiveness and prevent complete Imperial collapse. This dual strategy demanded unprecedented coordination between different elements of the Legion and careful management of information flows to prevent discovery of their true intentions. The Istvan V drop site massacre provided the Alpha Legion with their first major opportunity to demonstrate apparent loyalty to Horus while pursuing their hidden agenda. The operation called for 7 legions to assault the rebel positions on Istvan V, with 4 designated as the first wave and 3 supposedly loyal legions providing support as the second wave. The Alpha Legion's inclusion in the second wave, alongside the Iron Warriors and Night Lords, placed them in position to participate in the planned betrayal of the first wave forces, while also creating opportunities to influence the battle's outcome according to their own strategic requirements. The preparation for Istvan V revealed the sophistication of the Alpha Legion's intelligence networks and their ability to gather detailed information about the plans and capabilities of multiple factions simultaneously. Legion operatives had infiltrated the command structures of both loyalist and traitor forces, providing Alpharius and Omegon with comprehensive understanding of the tactical deployments, communication protocols, and strategic objectives that would govern the battle. This intelligence enabled them to identify specific opportunities where their actions could influence the outcome while maintaining their cover as Horus's allies. The actual execution of the drop site massacre demonstrated the Alpha Legion's ability to participate in treacherous operations while subtly limiting their effectiveness in ways that served their broader strategic objectives. When the second wave forces turned on the trapped loyalists, Alpha Legion units focused their attacks on specific targets that had been identified through their intelligence-gathering efforts. Rather than simply maximizing casualties among the loyalist forces, they prioritized the elimination of commanders and units whose survival might enable effective resistance to subsequent traitor operations. However, the Alpha Legion's participation in the massacre also involved deliberate failures and missed opportunities that allowed significant numbers of loyalist personnel to escape destruction. Communication intercepts were delayed just long enough to provide warning to specific units, while tactical coordination failures created gaps in the encirclement that enabled organized withdrawals. These actions required exceptional skill to execute without arousing suspicion from their traitor allies, as the failures had to appear consistent with the chaos and confusion of a complex multi-legion operation. The psychological impact of participating in the systematic betrayal and slaughter of fellow Astartes created significant stress within Alpha Legion ranks, as individual warriors struggled to reconcile their actions with their understanding of honor and loyalty. The compartmentalized nature of Legion operations meant that many participants were unaware of the broader strategic context that justified their apparent treachery, creating internal tensions that required careful management to prevent unit cohesion failures or security breaches that could expose their true agenda. The aftermath of Istvan V established the Alpha Legion's credentials as committed supporters of Horus's rebellion, while simultaneously advancing their hidden objectives through the systematic elimination of Imperial forces that could have prevented the Civil War from achieving the destructive scope necessary to fulfill the Cabal's prophecy. The massacre had effectively removed 3 entire legions from the Loyalist order of battle, while demonstrating the traitors' willingness to employ any methods necessary to achieve victory. This escalation made peaceful resolution of the conflict impossible and ensured that the Civil War would continue until one side achieved complete victory or mutual destruction rendered the outcome irrelevant. The intelligence gathered during the Istvan operations provided the Alpha Legion with detailed understanding of the command structures, tactical doctrines, and strategic capabilities of both loyalist and traitor forces. This information enabled them to develop comprehensive plans for subsequent operations that would maximize the mutual destruction necessary to prevent either side from achieving decisive victory. The Legion's analysts identified key commanders, critical installations, and strategic resources that could be targeted to prolong the conflict and increase its destructive impact on Imperial capabilities. The systematic purging of loyalist elements within Alpha Legion ranks began immediately after Istvan V, as Alpharius and Omegon moved to eliminate personnel who might oppose their true agenda or compromise operational security through misguided loyalty to Imperial ideals. The process required careful identification of individuals whose psychological profiles suggested inability to adapt to the complex moral calculations that governed the Legion's new strategic direction. These purges were conducted with characteristic Alpha Legion subtlety, appearing to result from routine operational casualties or administrative reassignments rather than deliberate elimination of potential dissidents. The recruitment of replacement personnel to fill positions vacated by the purges involved careful selection of candidates who demonstrated the psychological flexibility and moral adaptability necessary for the Legion's increasingly complex operations. New initiates underwent enhanced psychological conditioning designed to prepare them for operations that might appear to contradict traditional Space Marine values while serving broader strategic objectives that transcended conventional military considerations. This conditioning process drew upon techniques developed during the Legion's transformation period, adapted to address the specific challenges created by their dual loyalty situation. The establishment of new command protocols following Istvan V reflected the increased complexity of Alpha Legion operations and the need to maintain operational security while coordinating activities across multiple theaters of war. The Hydra cell structure was expanded and refined to enable greater compartmentalization of sensitive operations, while new communication systems were implemented to prevent enemy intelligence services from gaining insight into the Legion's true objectives. These modifications enabled the Legion to pursue contradictory operational goals simultaneously without creating internal coordination failures or security vulnerabilities. The Alpha Legion's participation in subsequent traitor operations demonstrated their ability to maintain their cover while subtly undermining the rebellion's effectiveness through carefully planned failures and misdirected efforts. During the assault on the Sol system, Alpha Legion forces were assigned to critical missions that required their specialized capabilities, but their execution of these missions consistently fell short of complete success in ways that provided loyalist forces with opportunities to mount effective resistance. Communication intercepts were delayed, infiltration operations encountered unexpected complications, and sabotage efforts achieved partial rather than complete destruction of their targets. The Siege of Terra represented the culmination of the Alpha Legion's strategy of controlled opposition, as they worked to ensure that neither side achieved decisive victory while maximizing the mutual destruction that would serve the Cabal's prophecy. Legion operatives positioned within both loyalist and traitor command structures provided intelligence that enabled each side to counter the other's most effective strategies, prolonging the siege and increasing its destructive impact on both Imperial and Rebel capabilities. The systematic elimination of key commanders and strategic assets on both sides prevented either faction from achieving the overwhelming advantages that might have enabled rapid victory. The Eastern Fringe campaigns that occurred parallel to the Siege of Terra provided the Alpha Legion with opportunities to implement their strategy on a broader scale, as they coordinated operations across multiple star systems to maximize the conflict's destructive impact on Imperial infrastructure and military capabilities. These operations involved complex coordination between different Legion elements, auxiliary forces, and allied organizations that had been cultivated during the pre-war period. The campaigns targeted critical supply lines, communication networks, and industrial facilities that supported both loyalist and traitor war efforts. The battle for the Kondak system exemplified the Alpha Legion's approach to these Eastern Fringe operations, as they manipulated White Scar's forces into prolonged engagements that prevented the 5th Legion from providing effective support to loyalist forces defending Terra. The operation involved elaborate deception campaigns that convinced the White Scars they were pursuing critical strategic objectives, while actually drawing them away from theaters where their intervention might have proven decisive. The Alpha Legion's intelligence networks provided false information about traitor fleet movements and strategic plans that justified the White Scars' continued operations in sectors where their efforts would have minimal impact on the broader conflict. The Alax's Nebula campaign demonstrated the Alpha Legion's ability to coordinate complex multi-theater operations while maintaining their cover as loyal supporters of Horus's rebellion. The engagement with Raven Guard survivors from Istvan V required the Legion to eliminate potential threats to their operational security while appearing to pursue legitimate military objectives. The operation involved careful manipulation of intelligence and tactical coordination to ensure that the Raven Guard forces were effectively neutralized without creating evidence of Alpha Legion complicity in their survival of the drop site massacre. The technological resources deployed during these Eastern Fringe operations reflected the Alpha Legion's access to advanced equipment and specialized capabilities that had been developed specifically for their complex strategic requirements. Communication systems maintained secure connections across vast interstellar distances while remaining undetectable to enemy surveillance efforts, enabling coordination between widely dispersed Legion elements. Advanced analytical equipment processed enormous volumes of intelligence data to identify opportunities for strategic intervention that would advance the Legion's hidden objectives. The recruitment and training of auxiliary forces during this period expanded significantly as the Alpha Legion sought to maximize their operational reach while conserving their limited Astartes resources for missions that specifically required enhanced human capabilities. These auxiliary units received advanced training in intelligence gathering, sabotage operations, and psychological warfare techniques that enabled them to function effectively as extensions of Legion capabilities. The training emphasized adaptability and independent decision-making that would enable auxiliary personnel to continue operations even when direct Legion support was unavailable. The intelligence networks that supported these operations achieved unprecedented scope and sophistication, with operatives positioned throughout Imperial space and within the command structures of multiple factions involved in the Civil War. These networks provided real-time intelligence about military movements, political developments, and strategic planning that enabled the Alpha Legion to anticipate and influence events across the galaxy. The information gathered through these sources often proved more comprehensive and accurate than that available to conventional Imperial intelligence services, giving the Legion decisive advantages in planning and executing complex operations. The analysis of battlefield casualties and strategic losses during this period revealed the effectiveness of the Alpha Legion's strategy for maximizing mutual destruction while preventing decisive victory by either faction. Imperial and traitor forces were suffering unprecedented losses that degraded their capabilities for continued expansion or consolidation of territorial gains. The prolonged nature of the conflict was consuming resources and personnel at rates that threatened the long-term viability of human civilization, creating conditions that aligned with the Cabal's prophecy regarding the necessity of limiting human expansion to prevent chaos dominance. The complexity of the Alpha Legion's strategic position during the Horus Heresy reached unprecedented levels as they navigated the treacherous waters of apparent rebellion while pursuing objectives that transcended simple factional loyalty. Their operations during this period demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond conventional military deception, involving the systematic manipulation of both loyalist and traitor forces to achieve outcomes that served neither side's immediate interests. The Legion's ability to maintain credible facades of loyalty to opposing factions while advancing their own agenda required operational sophistication that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in warfare. The Tenebrae installation incident exemplified the Alpha Legion's approach to operations that appeared to serve loyalist interests while maintaining their traitor credentials. The facility housed critical research into advanced Vox communication technologies that could potentially break through the warp storms plaguing Imperial communications during the Civil War. Intelligence gathered through their extensive networks indicated that successful completion of this research would provide either faction with decisive strategic advantages in coordinating military operations across multiple sectors. The Alpha Legion's response involved a complex operation that appeared to be a straightforward traitor assault, while actually ensuring that neither side could fully exploit the facility's capabilities. The initial phase of the operation involved Alpha Legion infiltrators who had been positioned within the facility's security apparatus months before the Civil War began. These operatives had established themselves as loyal Imperial personnel with impeccable service records and demonstrated competence in their assigned roles. Their presence enabled detailed intelligence gathering about the research progress, security protocols, and defensive capabilities that would prove crucial for planning the subsequent assault. The infiltrators also began implementing subtle sabotage measures that would compromise critical systems without creating obvious evidence of deliberate interference. When Alpha Legion forces launched their overt attack on Tenebrae, the operation followed standard traitor assault patterns that satisfied observers from other rebel legions, while incorporating elements designed to limit its ultimate effectiveness. The initial orbital bombardment targeted defensive positions and communication arrays according to conventional tactical doctrine, but the targeting solutions contained subtle errors that enabled key research personnel to evacuate with critical data before the facility's destruction. The ground assault that followed demonstrated appropriate aggression and tactical competence, while consistently encountering unexpected complications that prevented complete mission success. The evacuation of research personnel occurred through routes that had been secretly prepared by Alpha Legion infiltrators, who guided the fleeing scientists toward extraction points where Loyalist forces could recover them along with their research data. The timing of these evacuations was carefully coordinated to occur during periods when traitor surveillance was focused elsewhere, while the routes themselves had been selected to avoid areas where other rebel forces might intercept the fleeing personnel. The operation required precise coordination between infiltrators, assault forces, and external assets to ensure that the desired outcome appeared to result from tactical failures rather than deliberate planning. The intelligence provided to Loyalist forces regarding the Tenebrae assault demonstrated the Alpha Legion's sophisticated approach to information warfare. Rather than simply warning of the impending attack, which would have raised suspicions about the source of such intelligence, Legion operatives provided partial information that enabled Loyalist commanders to deduce the threat through their own analytical processes. False communication intercepts suggested increased traitor activity in the sector, while carefully placed rumors indicated potential targets that included the research facility among several possibilities. The Loyalist response to this intelligence followed predictable patterns that the Alpha Legion had anticipated through their comprehensive analysis of Imperial command structures and decision-making processes. Defensive reinforcements were dispatched to multiple potential targets, spreading Loyalist forces across several systems while ensuring adequate protection for the most critical facilities. The Alpha Legion's assault timing was coordinated to exploit these defensive dispositions, creating the appearance of intelligence failures while actually enabling the desired outcome of partial mission success that served neither side's complete objectives. The aftermath of the Tenebrae operation revealed the effectiveness of the Alpha Legion's approach to achieving multiple contradictory objectives simultaneously. Traitor forces received confirmation that the research facility had been destroyed and its capabilities eliminated as a potential Loyalist advantage. However, the evacuation of key personnel and research data enabled Loyalist forces to continue development of the communication technologies at alternative locations with enhanced security measures. Neither side achieved complete victory, while the Alpha Legion advanced their broader strategic objective of prolonging the conflict through balanced opposition. The Cipra Mundi compliance operation demonstrated the Alpha Legion's ability to manipulate traitor forces into actions that ultimately served Loyalist interests while maintaining their cover as dedicated rebels. The world had declared for the Emperor following news of Horus's rebellion, raising planetary defense forces and requesting Imperial military support to resist any traitor assault. The strategic value of Cipra Mundi lay not in its industrial capabilities or population, but in its position along critical supply routes that connected Loyalist strongholds in the galactic southeast with Terra and the core Imperial worlds. Alpha Legion intelligence networks had identified Cipra Mundi as a potential target for traitor forces seeking to disrupt Loyalist supply lines, while also recognizing that the world's capture would provide minimal strategic advantage due to its limited resources and defensive capabilities. The Legion's response involved encouraging other traitor forces to assault the world, while ensuring that their efforts would ultimately fail in ways that strengthened Loyalist defensive positions throughout the sector. This required careful manipulation of intelligence provided to traitor commanders and subtle sabotage of assault preparations that would create tactical disadvantages without obvious Alpha Legion involvement. The World Eater's forces assigned to the Cipra Mundi assault received intelligence suggesting that the world's defenses were significantly weaker than actual conditions warranted. Alpha Legion operatives within the 12th Legion's support structure provided false assessments of planetary fortifications, garrison strength, and civilian morale that painted a picture of easy victory requiring minimal preparation or tactical sophistication. This intelligence was carefully crafted to exploit the World Eater's preference for direct assault tactics while concealing defensive capabilities that would prove decisive during the actual engagement. The sabotage operations conducted against World Eater's supply lines and equipment inventories created additional complications that would hamper their assault effectiveness without creating obvious evidence of deliberate interference. Ammunition supplies developed quality control problems that reduced the reliability of heavy weapons, while vehicle maintenance issues created mechanical failures during critical phases of the assault. Communication equipment experienced intermittent malfunctions that disrupted coordination between different assault elements, while navigation systems provided slightly inaccurate positioning data that led to tactical confusion during landing operations. The Alpha Legion's direct participation in the Cipra Mundi assault involved providing specialized support that appeared to demonstrate their commitment to traitor objectives while actually ensuring loyalist defensive advantages. Legion technical specialists were assigned to disable planetary communication systems and orbital defense platforms, missions that required their advanced capabilities and could not be effectively performed by World Eater's personnel. However, the execution of these missions consistently fell short of complete success, leaving Loyalist forces with degraded but functional defensive capabilities that proved crucial during subsequent fighting. The battle for Cipra Mundi's primary, Hive City, demonstrated the effectiveness of these preparatory operations, as World Eater's forces encountered resistance that exceeded their expectations while operating with compromised equipment and unreliable intelligence. The assault devolved into prolonged urban warfare that negated many of the 12th Legion's tactical advantages while providing Loyalist defenders with opportunities to inflict significant casualties on the attacking forces. The Alpha Legion units supporting the assault focused their efforts on secondary objectives that appeared important but had limited impact on the overall battle outcome. The withdrawal of traitor forces from Cipra Mundi occurred after several weeks of inconclusive fighting that had consumed significant resources while failing to achieve strategic objectives. The World Eaters had suffered casualties that reduced their effectiveness for subsequent operations, while the prolonged engagement had prevented them from participating in more strategically significant battles elsewhere in the sector. The Loyalist victory strengthened Imperial control over critical supply routes, while demonstrating that traitor forces could be successfully resisted through determined defensive efforts. The intelligence provided to both sides during the Eastern Fringe campaigns revealed the Alpha Legion's sophisticated approach to information manipulation that served their broader strategic objectives while maintaining operational security. Loyalist commanders received accurate intelligence about traitor fleet movements and strategic intentions, but this information was provided through channels that concealed its Alpha Legion origins, while appearing to result from conventional reconnaissance or captured enemy communications. The intelligence enabled Loyalist forces to prepare effective defensive measures while avoiding decisive engagements that might end the conflict too quickly. Traitor forces simultaneously received intelligence that appeared to provide strategic advantages, while actually leading them toward engagements that would maximize mutual destruction without enabling decisive victory. False information about Loyalist defensive weaknesses encouraged traitor assaults against well-prepared positions, while inaccurate assessments of Loyalist fleet dispositions led to tactical deployments that created opportunities for effective counterattacks. The intelligence was carefully calibrated to maintain traitor confidence in their eventual victory, while ensuring that their operations consumed maximum resources for minimal strategic gain. The manipulation of communication systems throughout the Eastern Fringe enabled the Alpha Legion to control information flows between different factions while creating confusion that served their strategic objectives. Intercepted messages were selectively delayed or modified to create tactical advantages for specific forces at critical moments, while false communications created apparent intelligence leaks that influenced enemy planning processes. The sophistication of these operations required advanced technical capabilities and comprehensive understanding of enemy communication protocols that reflected the Legion's extensive preparation and intelligence gathering efforts. The Kondak system operations demonstrated the Alpha Legion's ability to manipulate White Scar's forces through carefully orchestrated deception campaigns that appeared to serve legitimate military objectives. Intelligence provided to the 5th Legion suggested that critical traitor fleet elements were operating in the sector, requiring immediate intervention to prevent their escape or reinforcement of rebel forces elsewhere. The information was supported by fabricated evidence that included false communication intercepts, manipulated sensor readings, and staged encounters with apparent enemy scouts that reinforced the deception's credibility. The White Scar's response to this intelligence followed their established tactical doctrine and operational preferences, involving rapid deployment of mobile strike forces designed to intercept and destroy enemy fleet elements before they could achieve their apparent objectives. The pursuit operations that followed consumed weeks of valuable time, while the 5th Legion chased phantom enemies through systems where their intervention would have minimal impact on the broader conflict. The Alpha Legion's coordination of these deception operations required precise timing and comprehensive understanding of White Scar's capabilities and decision-making processes. The false intelligence networks established to support these operations created the appearance of legitimate resistance movements and loyalist cells operating behind enemy lines. These fabricated organizations provided credible sources for the information being fed to White Scar's commanders, while creating additional layers of deception that concealed Alpha Legion involvement. The networks included false communication protocols, staged meetings with apparent resistance leaders, and carefully orchestrated evidence of ongoing anti-traitor activities that reinforced the overall deception narrative. The resource allocation decisions made by both loyalist and traitor forces during this period reflected the success of Alpha Legion information manipulation in creating strategic confusion that served their broader objectives. Military assets were consistently deployed to theaters where they would encounter effective opposition while being withheld from sectors where they might achieve decisive advantages. Supply lines were established along routes that appeared secure but actually created vulnerabilities that could be exploited to maintain operational balance between competing factions. The technological capabilities deployed to support these complex deception operations included advanced communication systems that could mimic enemy transmission characteristics while remaining undetectable to conventional surveillance methods. Sophisticated data processing equipment enabled rapid analysis of intercepted communications and the generation of convincing false intelligence that matched established patterns and operational procedures. Specialized infiltration equipment allowed Alpha Legion operatives to access secure facilities and communication networks without leaving evidence of their presence. The psychological warfare elements incorporated into these operations targeted specific personality traits and decision-making patterns that had been identified through comprehensive analysis of enemy commanders and their operational histories. The false intelligence and deception campaigns were tailored to exploit known preferences, fears, and tactical biases that would influence decision-making processes in predictable ways. This approach required detailed psychological profiles and sophisticated understanding of human behavior under stress that reflected the Alpha Legion's advanced training in manipulation and influence operations. The coordination between different Alpha Legion elements operating in various sectors required communication systems and command protocols that could maintain operational security while enabling effective strategic planning across vast interstellar distances. The Hydra cell structure proved particularly effective for these operations, as individual cells could pursue apparently contradictory objectives while contributing to broader strategic plans that remained hidden from enemy intelligence services. The compartmentalization of information ensured that the compromise of individual operations would not expose the Legion's overall strategy or objectives. The auxiliary forces recruited and trained to support these operations provided capabilities that extended the Alpha Legion's reach while conserving their limited Astartes resources for missions requiring enhanced human capabilities. These auxiliaries received specialized training in deception techniques, communication protocols, and operational security measures that enabled them to function effectively as extensions of Legion capabilities. Their integration into existing military and civilian organizations provided cover for Alpha Legion operations, while creating additional sources of intelligence and operational support. The culmination of the Alpha Legion's complex web of deceptions and strategic manipulations would face its ultimate test in the Sol system itself, where the ancient fortress worlds that guarded humanity's birthplace had become the final battleground between competing visions of the Imperium's future. The assault on Pluto represented more than a conventional military engagement. It was a confrontation between fundamentally different philosophies of warfare and loyalty that had been developing throughout the Horus Heresy. For the Alpha Legion, the battle would provide the opportunity to advance their hidden agenda while maintaining their facade of rebellion, but it would also bring them into direct conflict with forces that possessed both the capability and determination to expose their deceptions. Pluto's transformation into a fortress world had occurred over centuries of careful engineering and strategic planning under the direction of Dorn and the Imperial Fists. The dwarf planet's surface bristled with orbital defense platforms, underground bunker complexes, and weapon emplacements that could engage targets throughout the outer Sol system. The installations represented the pinnacle of Imperial defensive architecture, incorporating lessons learned from siege warfare across the galaxy and adapted specifically to exploit Pluto's unique characteristics. The planet's low gravity enabled the construction of massive structures that would have been impossible on worlds with standard gravitational fields, while its position at the edge of the solar system provided early warning capabilities and strategic depth for the defense of Terra itself. The Imperial Fist's garrison responsible for Pluto's defense had spent years preparing for exactly the kind of assault that the traitor forces were now launching. Every approach vector had been analyzed and prepared with overlapping fields of fire, while underground tunnel systems enabled rapid redeployment of defensive forces to counter enemy breakthrough attempts. The fortress installations incorporated advanced sensor networks that could track incoming threats across vast distances, providing defenders with detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions well before hostile forces entered weapons range. Dorn's personal presence on Pluto during the Alpha Legion assault reflected both the strategic importance of the installation and his determination to confront the rebels who had betrayed their oaths to the Emperor. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists had spent the early phases of the Siege of Terra coordinating defensive preparations across multiple worlds, but intelligence reports indicating Alpha Legion involvement in the Pluto assault had drawn him to the fortress world personally. His previous encounters with Alpharius during joint operations had left him deeply suspicious of the 20th Legion's methods and motivations, suspicions that recent events had only reinforced. The Alpha Legion's approach to the Pluto assault incorporated the sophisticated deception techniques that had characterized their operations throughout the heresy, but the nature of the target and the quality of its defenders created challenges that exceeded their previous experiences. The Imperial Fists had established comprehensive intelligence networks throughout the outer system that made conventional infiltration extremely difficult, while their defensive preparations had been designed specifically to counter the kind of unconventional tactics that the Alpha Legion typically employed. The fortress world's isolated position eliminated many of the civilian populations and complex political situations that the 20th Legion usually exploited to achieve their objectives. The initial phases of the assault involved Alpha Legion forces operating in coordination with other traitor elements, maintaining the appearance of conventional siege warfare while pursuing their own tactical objectives. The Legion's void warfare capabilities enabled them to engage Imperial Fist's fleet elements with apparent effectiveness, but their targeting priorities consistently focused on specific vessels and installations that had been identified through their intelligence networks as particularly significant to their broader strategic plans. The destruction of certain communication relays and sensor platforms appeared to serve conventional tactical purposes, while actually creating information gaps that would prove crucial during subsequent phases of the operation. The ground assault on Pluto's surface demonstrated the Alpha Legion's adaptation of their infiltration techniques to the unique challenges presented by a heavily fortified installation defended by forces specifically trained to counter unconventional warfare. Rather than attempting large-scale infiltration operations that would likely be detected by Imperial Fist security measures, the Legion employed smaller teams with highly specialized equipment designed to penetrate specific defensive systems. These teams focused on creating tactical advantages for the conventional assault forces while avoiding the kind of comprehensive infiltration that had characterized their previous operations. The fortress installations on Pluto's surface had been constructed with multiple redundant systems and compartmentalized security measures that made them extremely resistant to the sabotage techniques that the Alpha Legion typically employed. Imperial Fist's engineers had incorporated lessons learned from studying Alpha Legion operations during the early phases of the heresy, creating defensive systems that could continue functioning even when individual components were compromised or destroyed. The fortress complexes included independent power systems, separate communication networks, and isolated command centers that prevented single points of failure from compromising overall defensive effectiveness. The personal duel between Alpharius and Dorn occurred during the climactic phase of the ground assault, when Alpha Legion forces had penetrated deep enough into the fortress complex to threaten critical defensive positions. The confrontation took place within one of Pluto's primary command bunkers, a massive underground facility that housed the coordination systems for the planet's orbital defense network. The chamber itself reflected Imperial Fist's architectural preferences, with reinforced adamantium walls, redundant structural supports, and defensive positions that could be held against overwhelming odds. Dorn's presence in the command bunker resulted from his personal oversight of the defensive operations and his determination to prevent Alpha Legion forces from compromising the facility's critical systems. The Imperial Fist's Primarch had been coordinating the deployment of reserve forces when Alpha Legion infiltrators breached the bunker's outer defenses, creating a tactical situation that required immediate intervention by the highest levels of command. His decision to personally engage the enemy reflected both tactical necessity and his long-standing desire to confront Alpharius directly about the 20th Legion's questionable loyalty and methods. The battle between the two Primarchs demonstrated the fundamental differences in their approaches to warfare and their understanding of duty and honor. Dorn fought with the methodical precision that characterized Imperial Fist's combat doctrine, employing defensive techniques and systematic attacks designed to gradually overwhelm his opponent through superior positioning and tactical discipline. His weapon handling reflected decades of experience in siege warfare, where careful resource management and patient execution often proved more effective than dramatic gestures or risky maneuvers. Alpharius employed the deceptive techniques and unpredictable tactics that had defined Alpha Legion operations throughout their existence, constantly shifting between different fighting styles and attempting to create confusion about his true capabilities and intentions. His combat approach incorporated elements of misdirection and psychological warfare that sought to exploit his opponent's expectations and tactical assumptions. The Alpha Legion Primarchs movements suggested multiple possible attack vectors simultaneously, forcing Dorn to defend against threats that might or might not materialize, while creating opportunities for unexpected strikes. The weapons employed during the duel reflected each Primarch's tactical philosophy and the specialized equipment that their respective legions had developed. Dorn wielded Storm's Teeth, a massive chain fist that embodied the Imperial Fist's preference for reliable, straightforward weapons that could breach any defense through overwhelming force and superior engineering. The weapon's design incorporated advanced power field technology and reinforced cutting elements that could penetrate even the most sophisticated armor systems through sustained application of destructive force. Alpharius carried weapons that reflected the Alpha Legion's emphasis on versatility and deception, including a power spear that could be rapidly reconfigured for different combat situations, and a bolt pistol with specialized ammunition designed for specific tactical applications. His equipment incorporated advanced targeting systems and enhanced power sources that enabled rapid adaptation to changing combat conditions, while his armor included sophisticated sensor arrays and communication systems that maintained contact with other Alpha Legion elements throughout the engagement. The duration and intensity of the combat reflected the enhanced capabilities of both Primarchs and their determination to achieve victory regardless of personal cost. The battle raged through multiple sections of the command bunker, as both combatants sought tactical advantages through superior positioning and environmental exploitation. Structural damage from their weapons created new fighting positions and obstacles that influenced subsequent phases of the engagement, while the destruction of equipment and facilities eliminated tactical resources that might have influenced the battle's outcome. The decisive moment of the duel occurred when Dorn's systematic approach to combat finally overcame Alpharius's deceptive techniques through the application of overwhelming force and superior tactical positioning. The Imperial Fist's Primarch had gradually limited his opponent's options through careful maneuvering and defensive positioning, creating a situation where Alpharius's mobility and unpredictability could not compensate for Dorn's advantages in direct combat capability. The final exchange involved Storm's Teeth penetrating the Alpha Legion Primarch's defenses through a combination of precise timing and irresistible mechanical force. The apparent death of Alpharius created immediate tactical consequences for both the Alpha Legion assault forces and the Imperial Fist's defenders, as news of the Primarch's fall spread through the communication networks of both sides. Alpha Legion units throughout the fortress complex received confirmation of their Gene Father's death through their internal communication systems, while Imperial Fist's forces learned of their Primarch's victory through their own command networks. The psychological impact of this information influenced subsequent tactical decisions and unit morale in ways that would prove significant for the battle's ultimate outcome. The Alpha Legion's response to their Primarch's apparent death demonstrated both the resilience of their command structure and the sophisticated contingency planning that had characterized their operations throughout the heresy. Rather than collapsing into chaos or attempting desperate revenge attacks, Legion forces began implementing predetermined withdrawal protocols that had been established for exactly such circumstances. The evacuation procedures involved systematic destruction of sensitive equipment and intelligence materials, while maintaining sufficient combat effectiveness to cover the retreat of surviving personnel. The Imperial Fist's reaction to the news of Alpharius's death reflected their disciplined approach to warfare and their understanding that individual victories, regardless of their significance, did not guarantee overall strategic success. While Dorn's personal triumph provided a significant morale boost for Imperial forces throughout the Sol system, the fortress defenders continued implementing their established defensive protocols and maintained their vigilance against continued Alpha Legion operations. The Imperial Fist's command structure recognized that the Alpha Legion's compartmentalized organization might enable continued operations even after the loss of their primary leader. The questions surrounding the true identity of the fallen Primarch began emerging almost immediately after the conclusion of the duel, as Imperial Fist's personnel conducting post-battle analysis noted inconsistencies in the physical evidence and tactical patterns that suggested possible deception. The body recovered from the command bunker displayed all the expected characteristics of a Primarch, including the enhanced physiology and genetic markers that confirmed Alpha Legion origins. However, certain details about the armor configuration, weapon preferences, and tactical behavior during the final engagement differed slightly from established intelligence profiles of Alpharius's previous combat performances. The Alpha Legion's extensive use of body doubles and identity deception throughout their operational history created additional uncertainty about whether the fallen figure had actually been Alpharius or simply another sophisticated impersonation designed to serve specific tactical objectives. The Legion's known capabilities for physical modification and behavioral mimicry made it theoretically possible that even a detailed examination might not definitively establish the true identity of the deceased individual. The psychological conditioning and surgical alterations that enabled Alpha Legion operatives to assume false identities could potentially extend to creating convincing Primarch doubles. The tactical implications of this uncertainty extended beyond simple questions of enemy leadership casualties to encompass broader strategic considerations about Alpha Legion capabilities and intentions. If the fallen figure had indeed been Alpharius, the Legion would face significant challenges in maintaining their operational effectiveness and strategic coordination. However, if the death had been another elaborate deception, the psychological impact on Imperial forces might actually serve Alpha Legion interests by creating false confidence about their degraded capabilities. The investigation conducted by Imperial Fist's intelligence specialists revealed additional anomalies that complicated efforts to definitively establish the identity of the fallen Primarch. Communication intercepts from Alpha Legion forces during the engagement suggested genuine shock and dismay at their leader's death, but the sophisticated nature of the Legion's deception capabilities made it impossible to determine whether these reactions were authentic or simply another layer of misdirection. The behavioral patterns of surviving Alpha Legion personnel provided conflicting evidence that could support either interpretation of events. The broader strategic context of the Pluto assault and its relationship to the Alpha Legion's hidden agenda added another dimension to questions about the true significance of the apparent Primarch's death. The timing of the engagement and its tactical objectives suggested that the assault might have been designed to achieve specific goals regardless of its conventional military success or failure. The destruction of certain Imperial installations and the intelligence gathered during the operation could potentially serve the Legion's broader strategic purposes, even if the assault itself was ultimately repelled. The impact on Alpha Legion morale and unit cohesion varied significantly across different elements of the Legion, reflecting the compartmentalized nature of their organization and the varying levels of knowledge about their true strategic objectives. Units that had been operating under conventional military assumptions experienced genuine grief and tactical confusion at the loss of their Gene Father, while elements that possessed greater understanding of the Legion's complex agenda demonstrated more resilient responses that suggested preparation for such contingencies. The command succession protocols activated following the apparent death revealed the sophisticated nature of Alpha Legion organizational planning and their preparation for leadership casualties. Rather than creating a power struggle or organizational chaos, the succession process activated seamlessly through predetermined channels that maintained operational effectiveness while concealing the true extent of the Legion's command redundancy. The smooth transition suggested either exceptional organizational planning or the possibility that the apparent death had been anticipated and prepared for as part of a larger strategic deception. The intelligence gathered by both sides during the Pluto engagement provided insights into Alpha Legion capabilities and methods that would influence subsequent operations throughout the Siege of Terra. Imperial forces gained confirmation of certain tactical techniques and organizational patterns that could inform defensive preparations against future Alpha Legion operations. However, the sophisticated nature of the Legion's deception capabilities meant that even apparently reliable intelligence might be deliberately misleading, creating ongoing uncertainty about their true capabilities and intentions. The death of Alpharius on Pluto sent shockwaves through the Alpha Legion's command structure, but the true implications of this loss remained hidden beneath layers of deception that had been carefully constructed over years of preparation. While Imperial forces celebrated the elimination of what they believed to be the 20th Legion's sole Primarch, the reality was far more complex. Omegon's existence had been the Alpha Legion's most closely guarded secret, known only to the innermost circles of the Legion's command hierarchy. The survival of one half of the Twin Primarchs meant that the Legion's strategic capabilities remained largely intact, though the psychological impact of losing his brother created profound changes in Omegon's approach to the war. The immediate aftermath of the Pluto engagement saw Omegon assuming direct control of all Alpha Legion operations, while maintaining the fiction that the Legion was now operating under distributed command protocols following their Primarch's death. This deception required careful coordination across multiple theaters of war, as Legion forces needed to demonstrate the expected degradation in strategic coordination while actually maintaining their sophisticated operational capabilities. Omegon's unique position allowed him to observe the reactions of both loyalist and traitor forces to news of Alpharius's death, providing valuable intelligence about enemy assumptions and strategic planning that would prove crucial in subsequent operations. The grief that Omegon experienced at the loss of his twin went beyond simple personal loss, extending to a fundamental disruption of the psychic connection that had enabled their unprecedented coordination of Legion operations. The severing of this bond created a profound sense of isolation that affected his decision-making processes and strategic thinking in ways that gradually became apparent to those few subordinates who possessed sufficient clearance to observe his behavior directly. The loss forced Omegon to rely more heavily on conventional command structures and communication systems, while simultaneously requiring him to develop new approaches to the complex strategic calculations that had previously been shared between both Primarchs. The Cabal's prophecy took on new urgency in Omegon's thinking as the Siege of Terra approached its climactic phases. The death of Alpharius had eliminated one of the key decision-makers in the cosmic choice between humanity's expansion and its destruction, leaving Omegon to bear the full weight of this responsibility alone. His analysis of current galactic events suggested that the Civil War was approaching the critical threshold identified in the prophecy, where the outcome would determine whether chaos achieved permanent dominance or suffered a decisive setback that would limit its influence for millennia to come. The intelligence networks that the Alpha Legion had cultivated throughout Imperial space provided Omegon with unprecedented insight into the strategic situation developing around Terra. These networks confirmed that Loyalist forces were suffering severe casualties, but maintaining their defensive positions through superior preparation and tactical discipline. Simultaneously, traitor forces were experiencing significant losses while making steady progress toward their ultimate objective of breaching Terra's defenses and confronting the Emperor directly. The mutual destruction that characterized these engagements aligned with the Cabal's requirements for preventing either side from achieving decisive victory. Omegon's strategic analysis during this period revealed the complex nature of the choice facing him as the war approached its conclusion. Supporting Horus's complete victory would likely result in chaos dominance over the galaxy, as the Warmaster's corruption had progressed to the point where he served demonic interests more than human advancement. However, enabling Loyalist victory might simply delay the inevitable expansion that would eventually provide chaos with the vast human population necessary for permanent galactic domination. The optimal outcome required careful manipulation of events to ensure mutual destruction on a scale that would cripple humanity's expansion capabilities while preventing complete chaos victory. The Siege of Terra provided Omegon with opportunities to influence the conflict's outcome through carefully coordinated operations that appeared to serve traitor interests while actually limiting their effectiveness. Alpha Legion forces participating in the siege received orders that emphasized the importance of specific tactical objectives, while subtly ensuring that their achievements would not prove decisive for the overall campaign. Communication intercepts were delayed just long enough to provide loyalist forces with opportunities to reinforce critical positions, while sabotage operations achieved partial success that degraded but did not eliminate key defensive capabilities. The assault on the Imperial Palace represented the culmination of the traitor force's strategic objectives and the point where Omegon's influence over events would prove most critical. Alpha Legion infiltrators who had been positioned within the palace's defensive systems during the pre-war period provided intelligence about loyalist defensive preparations and identified vulnerabilities that could be exploited by attacking forces. However, this intelligence was carefully filtered to provide traitor commanders with enough information to plan effective assaults, while ensuring that loyalist forces retained sufficient defensive advantages to mount effective resistance. The battle for the Eternity Gate demonstrated Omegon's sophisticated approach to achieving strategic objectives through the manipulation of tactical events. Alpha Legion forces assigned to the assault received detailed intelligence about the gate's defensive systems and the deployment of loyalist forces, enabling them to plan coordinated attacks that appeared to have excellent chances of success. However, the execution of these attacks consistently encountered unexpected complications that prevented breakthrough achievements while maintaining sufficient pressure to force loyalist commanders to commit their reserve forces to the defense. The timing of these tactical failures was carefully coordinated to occur at moments when their impact would maximize mutual casualties while preventing decisive advantages for either side. Communication systems experienced malfunctions that disrupted coordination between different assault elements at critical moments, while technical equipment developed reliability problems that reduced the effectiveness of specialized weapons and support systems. The cumulative effect of these complications was to transform what should have been a rapid breakthrough operation into a prolonged battle of attrition that consumed significant resources from both sides. Omegon's personal involvement in the siege operations required him to maintain multiple layers of deception simultaneously, as he coordinated Alpha Legion activities while concealing his survival from both loyalist and traitor intelligence services. His physical appearance had been altered through surgical procedures and technological augmentation to prevent recognition by individuals who might have encountered Alpharius during previous operations. The modifications were subtle enough to avoid detection during casual encounters, while providing sufficient disguise to enable direct participation in critical missions without compromising operational security. The psychological burden of maintaining these deceptions while processing the loss of his twin created significant stress that affected Omegon's decision-making processes in ways that gradually became apparent to his closest subordinates. His tactical judgments became more conservative and methodical, reflecting a shift from the intuitive coordination that had characterized the dual Primarch approach to more conventional analytical processes. This change required adjustments to Alpha Legion operational procedures and communication protocols to accommodate their leaders' modified command style, while maintaining their effectiveness in complex operations. The intelligence provided to both loyalist and traitor forces during the siege's final phases reflected Omegon's increasingly sophisticated understanding of the strategic requirements for achieving the Cabal's objectives. Loyalist commanders received accurate warnings about impending traitor assaults, but these warnings were timed and formatted to appear consistent with conventional intelligence gathering, rather than revealing the existence of high-level sources within enemy command structures. The information enabled effective defensive preparations, while avoiding the kind of comprehensive advantage that might enable rapid loyalist victory. Traitor forces simultaneously received intelligence that encouraged continued offensive operations, while ensuring that these efforts would encounter prepared resistance. False assessments of loyalist morale and defensive capabilities suggested that breakthrough victories were achievable through sustained pressure, encouraging commanders to commit additional resources to assaults that would ultimately prove costly and inconclusive. The intelligence was carefully calibrated to maintain traitor confidence in eventual victory, while ensuring that their operations consumed maximum resources for minimal strategic gain. The climactic confrontation between Horus and the Emperor represented the ultimate test of Omegon's strategy for achieving the Cabal's objectives through careful manipulation of galactic events. The Alpha Legion's intelligence networks provided detailed information about the preparations for this encounter, including the defensive measures implemented around the Emperor's location and the tactical plans developed by traitor forces for breaching these defenses. Omegon's analysis of this information revealed opportunities to influence the confrontation's outcome through subtle interventions that would not be detected by either side. The security systems protecting the Emperor's sanctum had been designed to prevent unauthorized access while enabling loyal forces to provide support during critical moments. Alpha Legion technical specialists had identified vulnerabilities in these systems that could be exploited to create tactical advantages for attacking forces, but their analysis also revealed countermeasures that could be activated to limit the effectiveness of such exploitation. Omegon's orders to his technical teams emphasized the importance of maintaining system functionality while creating apparent vulnerabilities that would encourage traitor assault attempts. The final assault on the Emperor's position involved Alpha Legion forces in supporting roles that appeared to demonstrate their continued loyalty to Horus, while actually ensuring that the confrontation would occur under conditions that served the Cabal's strategic requirements. Communication systems were selectively disrupted to prevent effective coordination between different traitor elements, while security breaches were timed to occur in sequences that enabled loyalist forces to respond effectively to each successive threat. The cumulative effect was to ensure that Horus faced the Emperor in single combat rather than overwhelming him through coordinated assault by multiple Primarchs and their forces. The outcome of the Emperor-Horus confrontation validated Omegon's strategic analysis and confirmed the effectiveness of his approach to achieving the Cabal's objectives. The mutual destruction achieved through the battle eliminated both the War Master as a vehicle for chaos expansion and severely wounded the Emperor as a driving force for human galactic dominance. The psychological impact of these losses on both loyalist and traitor forces created conditions that would prevent either side from achieving the kind of decisive victory that could lead to renewed expansion or complete chaos domination. The immediate aftermath of the siege saw Omegon implementing contingency plans that had been developed to manage the transition period following the achievement of the Cabal's primary objectives. Alpha Legion forces began systematic withdrawal operations that appeared to result from the collapse of traitor coordination following Horus's death, while actually representing carefully planned repositioning to support long-term strategic goals. The withdrawals involved the destruction of sensitive equipment and intelligence materials while preserving critical assets that would be necessary for continued operations during the post-war period. The fragmentation of the traitor forces following their defeat at Terra provided Omegon with opportunities to influence the development of the ongoing conflict that would become known as the Long War. Rather than attempting to maintain unified resistance against loyalist forces, he encouraged the development of independent warband structures that would pursue their own objectives while contributing to the overall pattern of mutual destruction that served the Cabal's strategic requirements. This approach ensured that chaos forces would remain active enough to prevent Imperial consolidation, while avoiding the kind of coordinated effort that might enable renewed expansion. The establishment of new command protocols for Alpha Legion operations during the post-siege period reflected the changes in strategic objectives and operational requirements that resulted from the achievement of the Cabal's primary goals. The Hydra cell structure was expanded to enable greater independence for individual units while maintaining coordination capabilities that would support long-term strategic planning. New communication systems were implemented to enable secure contact between widely dispersed Legion elements, while preventing enemy intelligence services from gaining insight into their true objectives and capabilities. The recruitment of new personnel to replace casualties suffered during the siege involved careful selection of candidates who possessed the psychological flexibility and moral adaptability necessary for the Legion's increasingly complex mission parameters. The screening processes emphasized individuals who could function effectively within ambiguous authority structures while maintaining loyalty to abstract strategic objectives that might not align with conventional military or political goals. The training programs developed for these recruits incorporated advanced psychological conditioning designed to prepare them for operations that would extend across decades or centuries of continued galactic conflict. The long-term strategic planning that occupied Omegon's attention during this period involved complex calculations about the future development of galactic civilization and the ongoing struggle between order and chaos. His analysis suggested that the immediate objectives established by the Cabal had been successfully achieved, but that continued vigilance would be necessary to prevent either Imperial resurgence or renewed chaos expansion from creating conditions that could lead to galactic domination by either faction. The Alpha Legion's role in this ongoing conflict would require adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining their core mission of preserving galactic balance through strategic intervention. The Great Scouring that followed the Siege of Terra presented the Alpha Legion with unprecedented challenges as the Imperium sought to purge the galaxy of all traces of chaos, corruption, and traitor influence. Unlike their fellow traitor legions, who faced the Loyalist pursuit with straightforward resistance or desperate flight, the Alpha Legion's response demonstrated the sophisticated strategic planning that had characterized their operations throughout the heresy. Omegon's analysis of the post-war situation revealed that the Scouring represented both a threat to Legion survival and an opportunity to advance their long-term objectives through the systematic fragmentation of Imperial unity and the prevention of renewed expansion that could serve chaos interests. The immediate aftermath of Horus's defeat saw Loyalist forces launching coordinated campaigns to eliminate traitor strongholds throughout Imperial space. The Ultramarines under Guilliman spearheaded many of these operations, utilizing their superior logistics and organizational capabilities to systematically reduce rebel positions across multiple sectors. The Imperial Fists and Iron Hands contributed specialized siege warfare expertise and implacable determination to root out enemies who had taken refuge in fortified positions. The White Scars and Raven Guard provided rapid response capabilities and reconnaissance support that enabled Loyalist commanders to locate and engage fleeing traitor forces before they could establish new defensive positions. The Alpha Legion's approach to this Loyalist offensive differed fundamentally from the strategies employed by other traitor forces. Rather than attempting to maintain large concentrations of warriors that could engage Loyalist armies in conventional battles, Omegon ordered the systematic dissolution of traditional Legion structure in favor of smaller, independent cells that could operate without centralized coordination. This fragmentation process had been planned during the Siege of Terra, with detailed protocols established for the distribution of resources, personnel, and strategic objectives among the resulting warband formations. The Hydra cell structure that had defined Alpha Legion organization since their reunification with Alpharius proved ideally suited for this transition to distributed operations. Individual cells possessed the training, equipment, and psychological conditioning necessary to function independently for extended periods while maintaining their core identity and mission parameters. The compartmentalized nature of their previous operations meant that most Legion personnel had limited knowledge of broader strategic plans or the locations of other cells, providing natural security against interrogation or infiltration by Loyalist intelligence services. The process of fragmentation involved careful evaluation of each cell's capabilities, resources, and potential for long-term survival in hostile environments. Omegon personally oversaw the distribution of critical assets, ensuring that each resulting warband possessed sufficient firepower, technical expertise, and logistical support to maintain operations for decades without external assistance. Specialized equipment developed during the heresy was distributed according to strategic priorities, with advanced communication systems, infiltration gear, and intelligence-gathering capabilities receiving particular emphasis in the allocation process. The geographical distribution of these cells reflected sophisticated analysis of galactic political and military conditions that would influence their long-term survival prospects, rather than concentrating forces in specific regions that might attract coordinated loyalist attention. The cells were dispersed throughout Imperial space according to patterns that maximized their collective ability to influence galactic events while minimizing their vulnerability to systematic elimination. Some cells were positioned in the galactic fringe, where Imperial authority remained weak, while others established themselves in core systems, where their activities could have maximum impact on Imperial stability. The operational doctrines developed for these independent cells emphasized adaptability and long-term thinking over immediate tactical success. Each warband received broad strategic objectives that could be pursued through various means depending on local conditions and opportunities. These objectives typically involved undermining Imperial authority through political manipulation, economic sabotage, or the cultivation of separatist movements that would prevent the kind of unified expansion that the Cabal's prophecy had identified as dangerous to galactic stability. The recruitment strategies implemented by individual cells reflected the Alpha Legions' understanding that their long-term survival depended on their ability to replenish losses and expand their capabilities through the integration of new personnel. Rather than relying solely on traditional Space Marine recruitment from specific worlds, the cells began incorporating human auxiliaries, corrupted Imperial officials, and even alien allies who could provide specialized capabilities or access to resources that would be unavailable through conventional channels. This approach required careful screening and indoctrination procedures to ensure that new recruits could be trusted with sensitive information while maintaining operational security. The intelligence networks that had proven so effective during the heresy underwent systematic reorganization to support the new distributed operational structure. Rather than maintaining centralized coordination through a single command hierarchy, the networks were divided into independent segments that could function autonomously while occasionally sharing information through carefully controlled channels. This compartmentalization ensured that the compromise of individual network elements would not expose the broader intelligence apparatus, while maintaining sufficient coordination to enable strategic cooperation when circumstances warranted such collaboration. The technological resources available to individual cells varied significantly based on their specific mission parameters and operational environments. Cells operating in heavily monitored Imperial core systems received advanced stealth equipment and sophisticated identity falsification technology that enabled them to blend into local populations while conducting long-term infiltration operations. Those positioned in frontier regions were equipped with self-sufficient manufacturing capabilities and robust military hardware that would enable them to function independently of Imperial supply chains while maintaining combat effectiveness against local threats. The communication protocols established for inter-cell coordination represented perhaps the most sophisticated information security system ever developed by a Space Marine Legion. The protocols utilized multiple layers of encryption, dead drops, and indirect messaging systems that prevented enemy intelligence services from tracing communications back to their sources, while enabling essential coordination between different operational elements. The system incorporated randomized timing sequences and multiple redundant pathways that ensured message delivery while maintaining plausible deniability for all participants. Omegon's personal role in coordinating these distributed operations required him to develop new command methodologies that could function effectively without the psychic connection he had shared with Alpharius. The loss of his twin had forced him to rely more heavily on technological communication systems and conventional intelligence gathering, while simultaneously requiring him to trust subordinate commanders with greater autonomy than had been necessary during their previous dual leadership arrangement. This transition proved challenging, but ultimately strengthened the Legion's resilience by eliminating single points of failure that could compromise entire operations. The mystery surrounding Omegon's continued existence became one of the Alpha Legion's most valuable strategic assets during the Scouring period. Imperial intelligence services had confirmed Alpharius's death on Pluto through multiple independent sources, leading them to assume that the 20th Legion was operating under distributed command following the loss of their Primarch. This assumption influenced Loyalist strategic planning and resource allocation in ways that consistently underestimated Alpha Legion capabilities and coordination. The psychological impact of fighting an apparently leaderless enemy created additional complications for Imperial commanders who struggled to predict enemy behavior without clear command personalities to analyze. The perpetuation of the "I am Alpharius" phenomenon among Alpha Legion operatives took on new significance during this period, as it provided both operational security and psychological warfare benefits that exceeded its original purposes. Individual cell members could claim Primarch authority when circumstances required such deception, while the continued use of this phrase by captured or interrogated operatives reinforced Imperial assumptions about the Legion's distributed command structure. The practice created genuine confusion among enemy intelligence services, who found it impossible to determine whether specific claims represented actual command authority or simple psychological manipulation. The surgical and technological modifications that enabled Alpha Legion operatives to assume false identities became increasingly sophisticated during the Scouring, as individual cells developed specialized capabilities for long-term infiltration operations. Advanced medical procedures could alter physical appearance, vocal patterns, and even genetic markers to create convincing false identities that would withstand detailed scrutiny by Imperial security services. These modifications were often irreversible, requiring operatives to commit permanently to their assumed roles while maintaining their core loyalty to Legion objectives. The psychological conditioning programs implemented to support these deep cover operations involved techniques that went far beyond standard Space Marine indoctrination procedures. Operatives underwent intensive training in behavioral modification, memory manipulation, and personality restructuring that enabled them to genuinely believe in their false identities while retaining access to their true loyalties when specific trigger conditions were met. This conditioning created individuals who could pass even psychic interrogation while maintaining their effectiveness as Alpha Legion assets. The impact of these infiltration operations on Imperial institutions became apparent gradually as the Scouring progressed and Loyalist forces encountered increasing difficulties in maintaining coordination and strategic effectiveness. Communication systems experienced inexplicable failures at critical moments, while intelligence reports contained subtle inaccuracies that led to tactical mistakes and strategic miscalculations. Supply chains developed reliability problems that prevented effective logistical support for extended campaigns, while administrative systems generated bureaucratic complications that delayed or misdirected military operations. The cultivation of separatist movements throughout Imperial space represented one of the Alpha Legion's most successful long-term strategies for preventing renewed expansion while maintaining the appearance of loyal opposition to Imperial authority. Individual cells provided covert support to planetary governors, military commanders, and civilian leaders who possessed legitimate grievances against Imperial policies or taxation. This support typically involved intelligence about Imperial military dispositions, advanced weaponry that could enable effective resistance, and strategic advice about timing and coordination that maximized the impact of rebellious activities. The selection of target worlds for these separatist operations reflected careful analysis of political, economic, and strategic factors that would influence their potential for long-term success. Worlds with strong local traditions significant economic resources, or strategic positions along critical supply routes received particular attention, as successful rebellions in these locations would have maximum impact on imperial stability and expansion capabilities. The operations were typically planned to occur in coordinated waves that would strain imperial military resources while preventing loyalist forces from concentrating overwhelming strength against individual rebel movements. The auxiliary forces recruited to support these operations included a diverse array of human and alien assets who possessed specialized capabilities or local knowledge that conventional Alpha Legion operatives could not easily acquire. Merchant traders provided access to commercial networks and transportation resources, while corrupt imperial officials offered intelligence about military planning and administrative vulnerabilities. Alien allies contributed technological resources and strategic insights that enabled more effective resistance against imperial forces, though these relationships required careful management to prevent exposure of Alpha Legion involvement. The long-term strategic objectives that guided these distributed operations reflected Omegon's sophisticated understanding of galactic political dynamics and his commitment to the Cabal's vision of preventing either imperial or chaos dominance over the galaxy. Rather than seeking immediate tactical victories or territorial gains, the Alpha Legion focused on creating conditions that would prevent large-scale military campaigns while maintaining sufficient instability to prevent economic and demographic expansion. This approach required patience and strategic thinking that extended across decades or centuries of continued operations. The evolution of individual Alpha Legion cells during the Scouring demonstrated the effectiveness of their training and organizational principles in adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining core identity and mission focus. Cells operating in different environments developed specialized capabilities and tactical approaches that reflected their unique challenges and opportunities, while maintaining sufficient commonality to enable coordination when circumstances warranted joint operations. This diversity strengthened the Legion's overall resilience while making it virtually impossible for enemy intelligence services to develop comprehensive countermeasures. The mystery surrounding Omegon's ultimate fate became intertwined with broader questions about the Alpha Legion's true objectives and their relationship to the ongoing galactic conflict. Some Imperial intelligence assessments suggested that he had died during the Scouring, either through direct military action or internal power struggles within the fragmenting Legion. Others proposed that he had survived but retreated to the galactic fringe, where he continued coordinating Legion operations through sophisticated communication networks. The most disturbing possibility, from an Imperial perspective, was that he remained active within Imperial space itself, possibly operating under a false identity that enabled him to influence events from positions of apparent loyalty and authority. The perpetual nature of the Alpha Legion's threat to Imperial stability became increasingly apparent as the Scouring progressed and Loyalist forces discovered that their victories against individual cells did not significantly reduce the overall level of Alpha Legion activity throughout the galaxy. Each destroyed warband seemed to be replaced by new formations that possessed similar capabilities and pursued comparable objectives, creating the impression of an enemy that could regenerate indefinitely regardless of military setbacks. This regenerative capability reflected both the Legion's sophisticated recruitment and training procedures and their success in creating self-sustaining operational cells that could function independently while contributing to broader strategic goals. The transformation of the Alpha Legion from a unified military force into a hydra of independent cells during the Great Scouring established patterns that would define their operations throughout the subsequent 10 millennia. The fragmentation that Omegon had orchestrated as a survival mechanism evolved into something far more significant, a self-perpetuating network of operatives whose activities would influence galactic events in ways that often remained invisible to both Imperial authorities and Chaos forces. The Legion's distributed structure enabled them to survive purges that eliminated other traitor forces, while simultaneously positioning them to pursue objectives that transcended the simple opposition between Imperium and Chaos. The establishment of the Codex Astartes by Guilliman during the Second Founding created new opportunities for Alpha Legion infiltration that exceeded anything they had achieved during the heresy. The systematic reorganization of Loyalist legions into smaller chapters provided cover for Alpha Legion operatives to assume false identities within newly created formations, while the standardization of equipment and procedures made it easier for infiltrators to blend into unfamiliar units. The administrative chaos that accompanied such massive organizational changes enabled skilled operatives to insert themselves into command structures with fabricated service records that would withstand routine scrutiny for decades. The psychological conditioning that enabled these deep infiltrations required techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in human mental modification. Alpha Legion specialists developed procedures that could implant false memories, alter personality traits, and even modify fundamental beliefs while preserving core loyalties that could be activated through specific trigger sequences. Operatives underwent months of intensive conditioning that transformed them into genuine believers in Imperial ideology while maintaining hidden programming that would reassert their true allegiance when circumstances required such activation. The success of these infiltration operations became apparent gradually as the centuries progressed and Imperial military effectiveness began experiencing subtle degradation that could not be attributed to any single cause. Critical intelligence was occasionally delayed or misdirected, enabling enemy forces to achieve tactical advantages that should have been impossible given Imperial superiority in resources and coordination. Supply chains developed inexplicable bottlenecks that prevented effective logistical support during crucial campaigns, while communication systems experienced failures that disrupted coordination at decisive moments. The cultivation of separatist movements that had begun during the Scouring evolved into a sophisticated strategy for preventing Imperial expansion while maintaining the facade of internal political opposition. Alpha Legion cells provided covert support to planetary governors who possessed legitimate grievances against Imperial taxation or military conscription policies, offering advanced weaponry and strategic advice that enabled effective resistance against Loyalist forces. These rebellions were carefully timed and coordinated to strain Imperial military resources while avoiding the kind of comprehensive threat that might trigger massive retaliation. The selection of target worlds for these operations reflected detailed analysis of economic, political, and strategic factors that would maximize their impact on Imperial stability. Worlds that controlled critical supply routes received particular attention, as successful rebellions in these locations could disrupt trade networks and military logistics across entire sectors. Resource-rich planets were targeted to deny the Imperium access to materials necessary for continued expansion, while worlds with strong local traditions provided fertile ground for separatist ideologies that could spread to neighboring systems. The mystery surrounding Omegon's ultimate fate became one of the most enduring questions in Imperial intelligence circles, with various theories proposed to explain the continued coordination evident in Alpha Legion operations, despite the apparent absence of centralized leadership. Some analysts suggested that he had established a network of successor commanders who maintained his strategic vision through carefully preserved doctrinal teachings. Others proposed that advanced communication technologies enabled him to coordinate operations from a hidden stronghold in the galactic fringe, or even from within the Eye of Terror itself. The most disturbing possibility, from an Imperial perspective, was that Omegon had successfully assumed a false identity within the Imperial hierarchy itself, using his position to influence policy decisions and strategic planning in ways that served Alpha Legion objectives. The surgical and psychological modifications that enabled such deep cover operations had reached levels of sophistication that made detection virtually impossible through conventional means. Even psychic interrogation could be defeated through conditioning techniques that created genuine belief in false identities while concealing true loyalties beneath layers of programmed responses. The impact of Alpha Legion activities on major galactic events became increasingly apparent as the millennia progressed and patterns emerged that suggested coordinated manipulation of political and military developments. The Age of Apostasy saw separatist movements emerge with suspicious timing and coordination, while the Badab War involved strategic miscalculations and intelligence failures that enabled the conflict to escalate beyond what should have been possible given Imperial resources and experience. The 13th Black Crusade encountered Imperial defensive responses that were simultaneously more organized and less effective than historical precedent would suggest. The relationship between Alpha Legion cells and Chaos forces remained deliberately ambiguous throughout this period, as individual warbands pursued strategies that sometimes appeared to serve demonic interests while actually advancing objectives that conflicted with Chaos expansion. Some cells provided intelligence to Chaos Space Marine warbands about Imperial defensive positions, but this information was often carefully selected to encourage attacks against targets whose destruction would serve broader strategic goals rather than simply advancing Chaos territorial gains. Other cells actively opposed Chaos incursions when such opposition aligned with their mission to prevent any single faction from achieving galactic dominance. The technological capabilities available to Alpha Legion operatives evolved significantly during the millennia following the heresy, as individual cells developed specialized equipment and techniques adapted to their specific operational requirements. Communication systems achieved levels of sophistication that enabled secure coordination across vast interstellar distances while remaining undetectable to Imperial surveillance networks. Identity alteration technology advanced to the point where operatives could assume false identities that would withstand genetic analysis and even psychic scrutiny, while maintaining the ability to revert to their true forms when circumstances required such transformation. The recruitment strategies employed by different cells reflected their adaptation to changing galactic conditions and the need to maintain operational capabilities despite constant attrition from Imperial countermeasures. Traditional Space Marine recruitment from specific worlds was supplemented by the integration of human auxiliaries, corrupted Imperial officials, and even alien allies who possessed specialized knowledge or capabilities that conventional operatives could not easily acquire. These diverse recruitment sources created cells with unusual capabilities and tactical approaches that made them difficult for Imperial intelligence services to categorize or predict. The psychological impact of fighting an enemy whose true objectives remained unclear created ongoing challenges for Imperial military commanders who struggled to develop effective countermeasures against Alpha Legion operations. Traditional approaches to combating Chaos forces relied on understanding enemy motivations and strategic goals, but Alpha Legion activities often appeared to serve contradictory purposes that defied conventional analysis. Military victories against individual cells provided only temporary relief, as new formations would emerge with similar capabilities and pursue comparable objectives through different methods. The investigation of Alpha Legion activities by Imperial intelligence services revealed the sophisticated nature of their operational security and the multiple layers of deception that protected their true objectives from discovery. Captured operatives typically possessed only limited knowledge of broader strategic plans, while their psychological conditioning made them genuinely believe in false motivations that concealed their actual mission parameters. Communication intercepts yielded intelligence that appeared valuable, but often proved to be deliberately misleading, leading Imperial forces into tactical situations that served Alpha Legion interests rather than Imperial security. The analysis of captured Alpha Legion equipment and facilities provided insights into their technological capabilities, while simultaneously raising new questions about their resource acquisition methods and manufacturing capabilities. Weapons and communication devices demonstrated levels of sophistication that exceeded standard Imperial technology in specific areas, while incorporating design elements that suggested access to archaeotech or alien technological sources. The equipment's modular construction and standardized interfaces indicated coordinated development programs that required significant resources and technical expertise. The theological implications of Alpha Legion activities created additional complications for Imperial authorities who struggled to determine whether the 20th Legion should be classified as Chaos Space Marines or represent a unique category of threat that required specialized countermeasures. Their operations often appeared to serve neither Imperial nor Chaos interests exclusively, creating doctrinal confusion about their ultimate allegiance and appropriate responses to their activities. Some Imperial scholars proposed that the Legion represented a third faction in the galactic conflict, pursuing objectives that transcended the traditional opposition between order and chaos. The emergence of cults and secret societies throughout Imperial space that demonstrated suspicious similarities to Alpha Legion operational methods suggested the existence of recruitment and indoctrination networks that extended far beyond the Legion's original membership. These organizations typically focused on political manipulation and information gathering rather than direct military action, but their coordination and capabilities indicated professional training and sophisticated support systems. The investigation of these groups often revealed connections to apparently loyal Imperial citizens whose backgrounds contained subtle inconsistencies that suggested possible Alpha Legion conditioning. The impact of Alpha Legion activities on Imperial expansion efforts became increasingly apparent as the 41st millennium progressed, and the Imperium found itself struggling to maintain control over existing territories rather than continuing the aggressive expansion that had characterized earlier periods. Critical supply routes experienced ongoing security problems that prevented effective military logistics, while separatist movements continued emerging with suspicious regularity and coordination. Industrial worlds faced sabotage operations that reduced manufacturing capabilities without creating obvious evidence of external intervention. The relationship between different Alpha Legion cells varied significantly based on their geographical locations, operational environments, and specific mission parameters. Some cells maintained regular communication and coordinated their activities to achieve broader strategic objectives, while others operated in complete isolation for security reasons or due to the nature of their assignments. This diversity of approaches made it virtually impossible for Imperial intelligence services to develop comprehensive countermeasures that would be effective against all Alpha Legion elements simultaneously. The question of whether the Alpha Legion remained loyal to their original mission from the Cabal or had evolved new objectives based on changing galactic conditions represented one of the most significant uncertainties in Imperial strategic planning. The prophecy that had originally motivated their betrayal of the Emperor had been based on specific assumptions about human expansion and chaos influence that might no longer apply given the dramatically different conditions of the 41st millennium. The Legion's continued activities suggested either unwavering commitment to their original mission or adaptation to new strategic requirements that served comparable purposes. The analysis of galactic political and military trends during the closing years of the 41st millennium revealed patterns that could be interpreted as evidence of continued Alpha Legion influence over major events. The emergence of the Great Rift created opportunities for both Imperial and Chaos expansion that were consistently limited by various complications and setbacks that prevented either faction from achieving decisive advantages. The return of Robute Guilliman and his efforts to reform Imperial institutions encountered obstacles and opposition that often appeared to result from internal political conflicts rather than external military threats. The ultimate legacy of Alpharius Omegon and their legion remained deliberately obscured by layers of deception and misdirection that had accumulated over 10 millennia of covert operations. Whether they had succeeded in preventing the galactic dominance that the Cabal's prophecy had warned against, or had simply created an additional factor in the ongoing struggle between order and chaos, remained unclear to both imperial authorities and the Alpha Legion operatives themselves. The Hydra that had emerged from their original vision continued to grow and adapt, pursuing objectives that might ultimately serve humanity's survival or contribute to its destruction, depending on perspectives and interpretations that no single individual could fully comprehend. The enduring mystery of their true loyalty had become perhaps their greatest weapon, creating uncertainty that influenced the strategic calculations of every major faction in the galaxy. In a universe where knowledge was power and certainty was strength, the Alpha Legion had made doubt and confusion into instruments of war that continued to shape galactic events long after their original architects had passed into legend. Their legacy was not victory or defeat, but the eternal question of whether their actions served salvation or damnation for the species they had sworn to protect through methods that might ultimately destroy everything they claimed to defend.